Right, the clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Cybersecurity and Resilience, Network and Information Systems Bill, second reading.
No. Minister, to move second reading. Minister.
Mr Speaker, thank you very much indeed, and Happy New Year to you and all the House staff. It's the first opportunity I've had to say that to you, and I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time. Mr Speaker, on the 3rd of June 2024, a busy Monday morning in South East London, criminals attacked Synovis, an organisation that processes blood tests on behalf of our National Health Service. They didn't turn up physically, but logged onto computers thousands of miles away and set off ransomware, malicious software that encrypts files from afar, making them unusable. The attack had a ripple effect across London hospitals. It delayed 11,000 appointments. Blood transfusions had to be suspended, and the company lost tens of millions of pounds. This wasn't an isolated case. In the year leading up to September 2025, the National Cyber Security Centre has dealt with 204, and I quote, nationally significant incidents, meaning they seriously disrupted central government or our critical public services. That's more than double the 89 of 2024. No one disputes that we must do everything we can to protect the UK from these attacks. And why? Well, the UK is the most targeted country for cyber attacks in Europe. The UK was the 5th most targeted nation in 2024 by nation-state affiliated threat actors. In 2024, it is estimated that the UK businesses experienced over 8.5 million cybercrimes in the 12 months preceding that survey. And also for that year, over 4 in 10, 43% of UK businesses were subject to a cyber attack, over 600,000 businesses in total. And significantly, Mr Speaker, cyber attacks are estimated to cost UK businesses almost £15 billion each year, equivalent to 0.5% of the UK's annual GDP, notwithstanding the wider economic or IP theft or the experience indeed of patients, as in the first example. The average cost of a significant cyber attack for an individual business in the United Kingdom is estimated to be just over £190,000. There's been a 200% increase in global cyber attacks on rail systems in the past 5 years, increasing the likelihood of severe disruption to both the economies and people's daily lives. I'm happy to give way, yes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for giving way on that point. Would he agree, as we become more and more reliant on IT systems, I think in particularly for in my constituency of Harlow, the Princess Alexandra Hospital and the new system they have for patient registration, that it's more and more important that actually we combat the issue of potential cyber attacks, particularly from foreign powers and enemies of this country, and that's why this bill is so crucial.
Yes, I could agree more. And the example that I gave of the Synovis incident brought blood transfusion in London to a halt, which affected thousands of patients. So our everyday lives are affected by that. And as we modernise and digitise our economy, as we modernise and digitise government, we have to make sure that our systems are as secure as possible, and indeed cybersecurity is right at the heart of that. And it's not a defensive issue, it's actually very much an economic growth issue as well. If you see the impact it has both on our economy, on our public services, on the day-to-day lives of people, and indeed in the issue that I just gave before he intervened on our train system. I'm very happy to give it.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and great to see him in his post. On the point of economic growth, can he tell us how he has sought within this bill to balance the absolute need to have a regulatory framework that businesses can have confidence in, alongside being able to attract the continued investment and ensuring that we don't end up with an over-regulatory framework that stifles investment. Can he tell us how he's found that balance?
Well, this builds on the 2018 regulations, which was a hangover from the EU in terms of we adopting those into this country, and this expands on that, and very much to the intervention from my honourable friend previously. This is about an economic growth issue. It's about protecting our system. So we have to find a balance between making sure that our regulators have the powers and the tools to regulate properly, but also give businesses and our public services the confidence that they can use digital technology, knowing that we have the most secure cyber security in Europe, if not the world. And we're very, very good at this stuff. So that is the balance to be sought. But it's very much, this bill is about economic growth rather than about over-regulation for businesses. And I don't mean to say this flippantly, but cyber security is one of those areas, Mr. Speaker, if everything is working, nobody notices. And when it isn't working, suddenly everyone notices and it's everyone's problem. And that's why we're bringing this scope of this bill forward in order for us to be able to extend that. I'm very happy to give way to the
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for what he's saying and what he's bringing forward. There's much in the bill tonight to be encouraged for us. But the Minister, I know, is a regular visitor to Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland is the home to 130 cyber security companies with some 2,750 employees. It is therefore essential that this legislation protects those jobs and enhances capacity for more. So is the Minister able, or does he believe, that this bill both protects and provides opportunity for growth in Northern Ireland and indeed across the whole of the United Kingdom? Thank you.
Indeed it does, and it's one of a number of provisions that the Government are bringing forward to create growth across the country, but not just in Northern Ireland. The Secretary of State's passion is to make sure those jobs are everywhere, right across the United Kingdom, including in Northern Ireland. And my friend the Minister has been in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, recently discussing this legislation and wider cybersecurity issues with the industry in Northern Ireland. So I can assure the honourable gentleman that that is indeed the case.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, Mr. Speaker. Hackney Council was the subject of a major cyber attack in 2020. It did a good job, though very slow because of the nature of the challenge, getting things back up and running. So this bill is very welcome. But pursuant to the answer to the question of my honourable friend, the member for Chesterfield, there are challenges for some of the smaller companies. I represent Shoreditch and all those tech companies that need to also maintain a standard on cyber security but are small. And so how is he going to balance the regulation for those smaller companies to make sure that they can keep abreast of things but are not so dampened down, as my honourable friend from Chesterfield highlighted, so they can't progress and grow?
But making sure we extend the 2018 regulations and the scope of those into other parts of the economy, and I'll come on to that in part of my contribution. And indeed it's about also reporting things quicker to make sure that the attacks can be seen and action can be taken quicker, and also that reporting into their regulators. So it's giving the regulators the confidence and the powers across a wider scope of sectors in the economy, but also giving businesses the confidence that those sectors are having to report into regulators when things are going wrong, and therefore swifter action can be taken. And you can see from a whole host of the high-profile issues that have happened in recent times, including in Hackney Council, that the Right Honourable Lady, my Right Honourable friend, mentions, why it's so important to make sure that these pieces of legislation go through quickly and indeed do the job that they're entitled to do so. I'm very happy to give.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I apologise for keep intervening, but I just wondered, is there a piece of work that we need to do as well in terms of the culture and the fact that, you know, when businesses or the public sector are victims to cybercrime, there's a danger that employees may feel embarrassed and nervous about actually reporting their concerns, and to think we need to do a job, you know, to actually encourage people that if they are victims of cybercrime to come forward more quickly and recognise the challenges rather than sort of perhaps trying to, you know, hide it away and actually the issue become worse.
Well, thank you to my honourable friend for that intervention, because whilst physical security and national security is all of our issues, indeed so is cyber security. And what this is trying to do is to build on the 2018 regulations in order for us to widen the scope into other areas of the economy that have become much more prevalent, like data centres, for example. And I hope that that gives industries and sectors the confidence, including employees, to make sure they can report things into their regulators. The regulators are doing this and giving the powers to the regulators to give businesses confidence that they can report stuff in. It's not a regulatory heavy hand in order for us to be dampening businesses. So I hope I can give him and the rest of the House the assurance on that. Mr Speaker, before those significant number of interventions, I was talking about why this matters and gave some statistics to the recent cyber security activity in the United Kingdom. But it's why, because of all of that, after the election, one of the very first things we did as a new government was announce this new cyber security bill just 10 working days in. And since then, the department has been talking to cyber experts, businesses and regulators to turn these proposals into a comprehensive, serious and proportionate piece of legislation that we present here for second reading today. One that protects the public and strengthens national security without placing undue burdens on businesses. And I hope I can just repeat that again. One that protects the public and strengthens our national security without placing undue burdens on business. And I do appreciate that that is a very fine balance, but I hope this bill finds that balance. So I'm confident that the whole House will support it. I'm very happy to give way.
Very grateful to the Minister for giving me where we support this bill and its efforts to tackle cyber security. What it doesn't do is address the mass unauthorised scraping of trusted news content by generative AI systems. This is content, as he knows, is often taken without consent and compensation. So as the bill progresses, will he be prepared to look at some measures? Maybe something like a bot register where people have to declare their intent when it comes to this type of activity? And will he look at this seriously so that news could be protected in this new environment?
Well, Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman is very ingenious in the way in which he uses interventions on pieces of legislation. I know AI copyright is very close to his heart, being a former professional musician, maybe a current professional musician, and indeed one of the key musicians in MP4. Let's not push that to division, Mr Speaker, but the AI copyright issue is, of course, a key issue that the government is currently looking at. Both Secretaries of State at the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology and Culture, Media and Sport are working very closely together on this issue. There will be will be coming forward. I think the legislation means that there has to be a report to Parliament in March of this year. I'm sure he'll be very interested in that. And we're bringing together the industry and the tech companies to try and find a way through that particular issue. We know it's a huge issue. It's not covered in the scope of this bill. This bill has been kept in terms of the scope very tight in order to deal with the specific issues and the serious issues of those cyber security debates and issues. So, as we know, the first duty, Mr Speaker, of government is to keep people safe. And the question is how precisely the bill achieves that goal. The answer is simple. The UK's main cyber rules, the Network and Information Systems Regulations of 2018 or the NIS regime, were first introduced 7 years ago and haven't been updated since. These rules require the operators of essential services like energy, water and hospitals, as well as some digital service providers like online search engines, to take steps to protect the service they provide and the data they hold from cyber threats. But as you might expect, in the last 8 years, a lot has changed in the cyber landscape. We've had the rise of AI, which cyber criminals are using to their advantage. Data centres have become a firm fixture of modern life, and we want to see more. And since the rules were introduced, we've seen criminals evolve new tactics to exploit loopholes in the regulations, like the attack on the NHS supplier that I've mentioned, that revealed how hackers can target third parties, like IT companies or supply chains, as a backdoor to bring down a wider system. So as always, the story is one of technology and cyber threats moving faster than policymakers can possibly keep up with. I'm happy to give way.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's right to mention the impact on supply chains here. And as in the West Midlands, we've recently had the cyber attack on the JLR company. That had a significant impact not just on that company but on the supply chain, which has its roots right through the West Midlands. It's an essential part of our economy that was brought to a grinding halt by a cyber attack. So I'm just wondering if he can confirm to the House that this bill will help prevent such instances in the future.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and can I thank him for all he did in terms of the issues in Jaguar Land Rover. I know it's very close to his own heart, and indeed it was a really big issue across the country, Mr Speaker, of how a cyber attack can really not just affect one company, but the ripple effect throughout the economy. And of course, the government stepped in to unlock a £1.5 billion bolster to Jaguar Land Rover's cash reserves in order to help them through that particular problem. Now, I will say to the honourable gentleman, I'll come on to this slightly later, that Jaguar Land Rover and other private organisations are not covered by the scope of this particular bill. The reason for that is that individual private companies should be taking their own cyber security seriously and making sure that those incidents and threats are, the risks of those are minimised as much as possible. This particular bill is widening the scope of the existing regulations which don't take into that. But of course, the government is working very closely with Jaguar Land Rover, Marks & Spencer and others who've been in these high-profile cases, because we know from those big high-profile cases the real impact they can have on our economy. But indeed, had the government not stepped in and had this issue not been resolved, the impact on Jaguar Land Rover itself and the tens of thousands of employees at the plants and indeed in the supply chain would have been catastrophic and not really worth thinking about. So I thank my honourable friend for raising that particular issue. Mr Speaker, as always, the story, of course, as I've said, is one of technology and cyber threats moving faster than policymakers can keep up with. But today we are fixing that. So the first change in the bill is to widen the scope of the existing 2018 regulations. To keep up with the changes of the last 8 years, we're adding a few new things to that list, starting with large load controllers. This includes any organisation that manages a significant flow of electricity to or from a smart appliance. It might be a company that supports electric car charging, for example. Bringing these entities into scope will safeguard our power supply and give consumers confidence in using energy smart appliances, all of which is critical as we advance towards our Clean Power 2030 mission and net zero. We're also adding large data centres as number 2 in recognition of their growing importance to our day-to-day lives and to the economy. These are vast digital warehouses for the United Kingdom, home to servers that host everything from patient records to their bank details. This is the data that underpins modern life, underpins all of our lives and our communities, and it must be protected. And we're expanding the scope of the regulations to include managed service providers as well. These are organisations that provide ongoing functions, like an IT help desk, to an outside client. Their access makes them an attractive target for cyber attacks, as criminals can find one weak spot and bring countless organisations down. In 2024, an attack on a service provider for the Ministry of Defence, for example, compromised the personal data of around 270,000 people, military personnel, reservists and veterans. As organisations rely more and more on outsourced tech, we have to close this gap. In fact, weaknesses in the supply chain have become such a risk that we are going even further in allowing regulators to designate certain organisations as critical suppliers. This includes certain suppliers to essential services that could have significant impact on the economy or society as a whole. Key suppliers to water companies, grid operators or air traffic control, for example, these critical suppliers will be subject to cyber security duties, which we will set out in secondary legislation. I'm happy to give you.
Last year, the Treasury Select Committee wrote to the top 10 banks in the UK because there had been a number of outages. There was no suggestion that cyber security is involved in most cases, but a trend coming back from the responses was that third-party software providers were often the source of the issue. What is his thinking about how to involve the banking sector in the scope of this bill?
Well, the banking sector are obviously in the scope of the regulators in terms of cyber security, and there has been a number of outages that the Right Honourable Lady mentions. But I think the general principle here is that cyber attacks are no longer coming in through the front door. They're coming in through third parties, they're coming in through suppliers. We've seen that in the recent incidents at Heathrow, for example, in cloud outages with AWS and other companies like that. So they are covered by their own regulations, and similar to the answer to my honourable friend about Jaguar Land Rover, they won't be in the scope of this particular bill, but we do hope that the financial services sector, who are leaders in cyber security actually for a whole host of fairly obvious reasons, take that forward. Let me also say, Mr Speaker, I know that the recent attacks on British icons, as we've discussed, like Marks & Spencer and Jaguar Land Rover, will loom large in people's minds, and indeed many members across the Chamber have already mentioned them. Supply chains were thrown into chaos, with small businesses paying the price, and that shows the ripple effect across the economy. When one part of the system is attacked, that ripple effect into other businesses, into smaller businesses, into patients in terms of our public service examples earlier, are really quite clear. So we are clear. All businesses, and that covers both financial services, Jaguar Land Rover, Marks & Spencer and others, must take immediate steps to protect themselves. That's why in October, members of the Cabinet wrote to the FTSE 350 companies, urging them to strengthen their defences by doing 3 things. Firstly, to make cyber risk a board priority. Secondly, to require suppliers to have a cyber essentials certificate. And thirdly, sign up to their early warning service. This was followed by a similar letter to entrepreneurs and small businesses in November with bespoke advice for smaller teams. We know these actions work. Organisations with cyber essentials are 92% less likely to claim on cyber insurance than those who don't. Businesses who best know how to protect themselves, so we're not here to regulate for the sake of regulating. Government is taking action too. And I announced this morning the Government's Cyber Action Plan sets a radically new model for how government will strengthen its cyber resilience. Backed by over £210 million of investment, government departments will be held to equivalent standards to those set out in this bill. And that's why the public sector and the government is not included in the scope of the bill because of the Cyber Action Plan. Government shouldn't need to legislate for itself, but just get on with making sure that we're leading the charge and making sure that the Cyber Action Plan it strengthens our own government cyber. I don't know if that was an attempt at intervention from the opposition front bench, but I have to take it. Yes, I have to go.
Well, I welcome the Minister's comments about the obligation on the public sector. However, I would caution him that in my experience, cybersecurity is one of those things that ministers talk about, but then other priorities overtake it. And the advantage of legislative requirements is it forces ministers to think about it. So I would just urge the Minister, as this bill passes through Parliament, to look again at that point. I think there is a case for putting more stringent requirements on the public sector in order to force ministers' minds on the point.
Can I thank the right honourable gentleman for that intervention? I know he would have had some involvement in this when he was on this side of the chamber, and indeed the 2018 regulations came out of the previous government, and we are all trying to make sure that we're catching up with the technology as quickly as it moves. It's a very interesting point that he makes, which I'm very conscious of and happy to take away. I hope the Cyber Security Action Plan today, which is backed by £210 million, we're determined to deliver that. I'm determined to deliver that. I know the previous actions that the previous government took didn't come to fruition in terms of that 2030 target that they had, which is why we've refreshed the action plan and brought it forward with some significant cash. So it's really important for us to make sure, as ministers, we take that forward, and I hope that he will hold us to account to ensure that we are fulfilling that promise in the Cybersecurity Action Plan, because I do feel that public services and indeed central government must take the leading role to show businesses that this is the real approach is to take, is to make sure all our systems are as secure as possible for not just economic grounds but for the people that we all seek to represent. Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to get to
thank the Minister for giving way, and also for the excellent points he is making with regard to the importance of cyber security and the Cyber Security Action Plan. Could you perhaps say a little bit about the way in which the success of the Cyber Security Action Plan will be measured, monitored and communicated back to this House? He is probably aware that only 33,000 cyber essential certificates were issued, for example, in 2024, and so an increased take-up of cyber essentials and the guidance in the action plan is essential.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the action plan itself there are some key dates in there to monitor progress, and I wrote to the Honourable Lady, the Chair of the Select Committee, this morning at the publication of the action plan to lay out some of those issues. So the letter will be landing. Very happy to come to the Select Committee to discuss that in more detail in front of the committee, and hope that the committee and indeed opposition on our own benches hold us to account for delivering on this, because it is so fundamentally important to government, whether it be digitisation, modernising government, winning the case with the public about why digitisation is so important and why government should be as secure as it possibly can be, and leading the charge on that across all of the economy. So I hope that we can take that forward and the committee can take that forward in the weeks and months ahead. Mr. Speaker, I was talking about the launch of the Government Cyber Action Plan this morning, backed by over £210 million of investment. Government departments will be held to equivalent standards to those that are set out in this bill, and I hope that partially answers the question from my honourable friend, the Chair of the Select Committee. But while the focus of this bill is on essential services, it will also indirectly help businesses, including those damaged by the recent attacks, and government. Almost all organisations today rely on data centres or outsourced IT or some kind of external supplier. So by extending the bill's oversight, we're preventing attacks that could, in theory, reach thousands of organisations. The second change in the bill is to give new powers to our regulators responsible for enforcing the NIS framework. Effective compliance is crucial to the success of any regime. These reforms could be world-leading on paper, but without proper enforcement, they are meaningless. So the bill will... Very happy to give way.
Clarification point. So we've talked about the regulators having new powers to designate critical national infrastructure in regard to cybersecurity threats. Who actually has accountability? Because I've been looking at the bill now. It says regulation made by the Secretary of State. Which Secretary of State is that when this is a cross-departmental and cross-government approach?
Cybersecurity is the responsibility of the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, but indeed the Cabinet Office obviously have a clear resilience issue as well, and we will have heard that from your right honourable colleague who was in the Cabinet Office previously. So the Secretary of State, the DC Secretary of State, will make those regulations, but there are a plethora of regulators involved in this process, because obviously if you're talking about energy, if you're talking about water, data centres, they all have different regulators, so they are being empowered through this legislation, through the expanded scope of the number of sectors that are being brought into the legislation, for those regulators that regulate those particular sectors to take the responsibility. I'm happy to give way.
extremely grateful to the Minister for giving way. On that point about regulators, the industry have issued a brief which points out quite sensibly that these regulators are going to have a lot of extra duties to perform and will therefore need extra resources to be able to perform those duties. But the extra resources they require will only be unlocked when the bill itself has passed. So is there not a danger of a transition period where duties will be laid on regulators to fulfil their role before they've got the resources to carry it out?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have to pass the legislation before the legislation may be amended in this House. The legislation may change through the passage of its progress through both Houses, and therefore the regulators in that sense will not know what they're regulating until the bill has actually passed. But we've been working, as I mentioned at the start of my contribution, with regulators, with businesses and with organisations and cybersecurity experts in the run-up to producing this bill to make sure it's in the right place, that's proportionate on businesses, proportionate on regulators, but make sure mostly, which I think is the most important thing, that it's effective. So I'm sure we'll have those debates as we go through the whole of that, the process through the committee stage and indeed third reading in this House of those kinds of issues. But I very much acknowledge what the Right Honourable Gentleman has said. Mr. Speaker, the bill will strengthen the powers of the NIS regulators, ranging from Ofgem to the Civil Aviation Authority, who together uphold the UK's cyber-based rules across different sectors. I maybe took the intervention 10 seconds too early in this particular contribution, because they work together to uphold the UK's cyber rules across those different sectors. We're raising the maximum fine they can impose, for example, while simplifying the penalty bands to make them clearer. The key driving force for this measure is not the punishment of rule breakers or raising revenue, but to incentivise firms to be vigilant. Our goal is 100% compliance and zero fines. We'll also be asking regulated organisations to change the way they report attacks, expand both the types of incidents they have to report and the time frame in which they have to report them. This is a small but crucial change. Under the current rules, regulators only get notified about a breach once it has already caused significant disruption, when traffic lights have failed or the heating has shut off, but the system doesn't include cases with the potential to cause a crisis much later, like a hospital's computer system quietly being spied on as hackers wait for their moment to strike. Under the bill, if you are in scope, you will have to tell your regulator and the National Cyber Security Centre about these types of breaches within 24 hours and provide a full report within 3 days. Pace and speed is of the essence. This will not only give us better information, but help agencies warn others, if they need to, before they become the next target. The bill will also allow the government to set clear and consistent outcomes for regulations to work towards. One of the virtues of having a regime enforced by different agencies is that each has sector-specific expertise. Ofgem understands the complex digital systems that underpin the national grid. The Aviation Authority knows the precise threats to air traffic control. But this approach has sometimes led to inconsistencies in how the regime is applied, with some bodies interpreting the rules differently from others. Today's bill aims to fix that, with a single set of objectives issued by central government across the board. We will send the message no sector is an easy target in the UK. We will also be improving the way regulators, intelligence agencies and law enforcement share information with each other by providing greater clarity on what information regulators can share and receive. And it's important that regulators have the resources to do their job, going to the point from the Right Honourable Gentleman. So the bill will also give them new powers to recover the full costs associated with their regulatory duties. And to ensure transparency, regulators will consult on how these fees will be calculated and publish a statement each year to show how these funds were being used. Together, the measures add up to a much more consistent and effective regime with better reporting and much clearer guidance for all involved. Mr. Speaker, this bill ensures the UK's cyber security regime is not only fit for today, but is flexible enough to head off future threats as well. I mentioned a few of the things that have changed in the last 8 years: shifts in technology and the nature of cyber attacks, artificial intelligence, data centres, the economy. But one of the biggest changes, of course, was Brexit. Since our official exit from the European Union in January 2020, we've been unable to amend the NIS regulations without primary legislation, because the rules were originally part of European Union law. This has made it slow and difficult for us to keep pace with new emerging threats and technology. Meanwhile, Brussels is pressing ahead with NIS2, their forward-looking update, while we lag behind. This procedural quirk has left essential UK services more exposed, which perhaps tells us something about why the UK has such appalling figures in comparison to some of our EU counterparts, as hackers and cybercriminals exploit gaps in outdated laws. It's an unacceptable risk. So today's bill includes new powers for the government to update the NIS regime via secondary legislation in future to make it quicker and more agile to moving technologies. If we need to respond quickly, for example, to a new type of cyber threat, this is not to override Parliament. In almost all cases, the government will still be required to consult on any changes, and Parliament will have the final say over any legislation made under this power. But delegated powers are essential for keeping us as responsive as possible. When national security is on the line, we need the ability to act fast and decisively. In fact, in extreme cases, some threats emerge so rapidly that even secondary legislation is too slow. If an ally were to be invaded by a hostile state, for example, suddenly escalating the cyber risk to the UK. So the government will also be given powers to direct regulators or regulated entities where national security is threatened to issue specific cyber security guidance in a crisis, for example. These powers are intended as a last resort to protect our national security, and safeguards are built into the bill to make sure they are used accordingly. But let me end by saying this, Mr. Speaker. The UK's cyber sector is the third largest in the world. We heard that from our friend from Northern Ireland. It achieves double-digit growth year on year. We have fast-growing clusters of expertise in Cheltenham and in Manchester, and this legislation will supercharge that success, doubling down on one of our nation's greatest assets. And at its core, this bill is about protecting the essential services that we all rely on. So the lights always stay switched on, clean water always runs in the tap, and hospitals have always safe and secure when we need them. The real-life community issues that we all encounter every single day and all of our constituents encounter every single day. This is more than a technical upgrade. It's a bold commitment from government to protect one of our biggest economic strengths and to keep the UK safe in a rapidly evolving digital world. Together, working towards a future where security is not a hope but a guarantee. And I commend this bill to the House.
Yeah. The question is that the bill now be read a second time. Shadow Secretary of State Julia Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Happy New Year to you, and thank you very much for putting the heating on. And I'm grateful to the Minister for setting out the government's rationale for this legislation instead of the Secretary of State. I don't know why he was demoted either, but I want him to know that we appreciate him. We, as the opposition, recognise the scale of the cybersecurity challenge that the country faces. If the pandemic accelerated the adoption of digital technology at a pace we'd never before seen, then the advent of artificial intelligence will embed that technology into our economy in wholly new ways, ways that bring opportunity, of course, but also unprecedented risk. AI and automation will not only transform productivity, they will equip hostile states, criminal gangs and opportunists alike with tools capable of eroding our national defences at speed and at scale. It is right that Parliament is legislating to raise the collective security bar. We on this side of the House support that principle. But legislation of this kind does not come around often. Cyber law takes time to develop, and once this bill passes, it's unlikely that Parliament will return to this territory for some years. That means we must ask two very simple but very serious questions today. Will this law work, and is it enough? Before answering those questions, it's worth reminding ourselves of the real-world consequences of failure, because cyber risk is neither abstract nor theoretical. Last year, the UK experienced what is widely regarded as our most economically damaging cyber incident to date, when Jaguar Land Rover suffered a major attack. This was not a sophisticated act of cyber warfare against the state, though such acts are happening with increasing regularity. It was by a band of hackers, but the consequences were enormous. For 5 weeks, Jaguar Land Rover was unable to operate its automated manufacturing lines. Cyber-related costs mounted to nearly £200 million. National economic output was visibly affected in that month alone. But the real damage did not stop at the factory gates. Hundreds of SMEs in the supply chain, many operating on thin margins, were pushed to the brink. Workers faced uncertainty, contractors had their work paused, and ultimately the government had to step in with £1.5 billion worth of loan guarantees to prevent wider economic fallout. So when we consider this bill, we must ask whether it would have done anything to strengthen our collective resilience. That is one of the tests this legislation ought to meet, and it's not yet clear that it does. Indeed, certainly JLR would not have been stopped as an attack, as the Minister himself has made clear, because it would not have been in scope. The cyber threat landscape is evolving at an extraordinary pace. New research shows that cyber attacks now cost our economy nearly £15 billion every year. High-profile breaches of businesses like Marks & Spencer's and the Co-op have demonstrated how quickly consumer confidence, jobs and supply chains can be put at risk. Last year alone, insurers paid out £197 million to help businesses recover from cyber incidents. In fact, the FTSE 100's collective cyber insurance bill is now larger than the defence R&D budget. The bill seeks to respond to one aspect of this reality by expanding the scope of existing regulations. Data centres, managed service providers, load controllers and designated critical suppliers will now fall within its ambit. That is a welcome acknowledgement that digitisation has introduced systemic risks that the original NIS regulations of 2018 did not adequately cover. The bill also strengthens the powers of regulators, introducing cost recovery mechanisms, and it tightens incident reporting requirements. These measures are intended to modernise our cyber framework and address clear shortcomings identified in reviews of the NIS regime in both 2020 and 2022, and on paper that all sounds sensible. But intent alone is not enough, which brings me back to our central concern. Will this law work in practice in raising the standard of our collective resilience? The uncomfortable truth is that in some of the most high-profile cases of cyber attack, penetration of systems happened by attackers who used valid credentials. Systems behaved normally. The breaches looked like legitimate access until it was too late. Human frailties were exploited. Help desks persuaded to reset passwords. Staff or contractors impersonated. This bill mainly helps after an attack, not before, by mandating reporting, improving intelligence sharing and increasing accountability. And as I say once again, as the Minister is certainly...
Minister giving way. It's a friendly intervention. I'd always like to get a bit of cross-party agreement in the House where possible. And the question I asked the Minister with regard to the importance of changing the culture to employees to make sure they do report cyber attacks and feel confident to report cyber attacks, would she agree with that?
Agree with that, and he is fundamentally correct that this is about culture, and this is the point I'm making, that as many regulations as we can pass, a lot of the holes in our cyber security systems come down to human frailties, and this is one of the challenges that means it's not just about new laws. This is about changing a whole number of things to make us more resilient in this space. It is right not to dictate technical standards in primary law that will soon be outdated in the fast-moving world of technology. So the question really is whether this law is the right mix of carrot and stick to make affected firms act in a way that raises the security bar. Now, there are several areas where we fear it may not. First, there is potentially an enforcement paradox. The bill expands regulatory powers and increases the scale of potential fines, but the evidence from the existing regime does not suggest definitively that fines and new regulations deliver us greater cyber resilience. Under the current NIS regulations, enforcement's been slow, inconsistent and often toothless. Very few significant penalties have been issued, and where they have, the delay between incident and sanction has sometimes stretched beyond 2 years. That delay matters because it actively undermines deterrence. It disconnects accountability from operational reality. Simply widening the scope of regulation without ensuring that regulators are properly resourced, empowered and required to act quickly risks creating obligations that exist on paper but lack any real-world bite. We also have concerns about the bill's cost recovery model. Funding regulators through levies on the organisations they oversee risks unintended consequences in terms of improving our resilience. For large firms, the cost burden may be manageable, but for smaller enterprises, it amounts to an additional operational tax that could divert scarce capital away from cyber defence, staff training and innovation. There's also a structural risk here. Regulators reliant on fee income may face incentives to expand scope and complexity unnecessarily, creating bureaucratic drag that crowds out voluntary, market-led initiatives that often raise standards more effectively than prescriptive regulation. I also worry more generally that this will play into tech monopolies. The companies that thrive under this kind of environment are the ones with big compliance and legal departments. That concentrates risk and makes our tech economy less diverse, with serious implications that I shall come on to. There may be reporting challenges too. Again, a two-stage reporting process within 24 and 72 hours may be achievable for large, well-resourced organisations with in-house cyber teams. But for smaller operators, this risks creating compliance culture focused on speed, not substance. There's also the danger of duplication. Many organisations already face overlapping reporting obligations under UK GDPR, sectoral rules and existing legislation. Without simplification and proportionality, the administrative load could be significant, once again diverting attention and resource from the very cyber threat management the bill seeks to improve. We need to avoid this becoming a something must be done bill that totally misses the mark. The bill also fails to grapple properly with the human factor in cybersecurity, already talked about by the Right Honourable Gentleman for Harlow. Technology alone does not keep organisations safe. Governance matters. Yet board-level ownership of cyber risk is moving in the wrong direction. Only 27% of businesses now have a board member explicitly responsible for cybersecurity. That is down from 38% just 3 years ago. Without mechanisms to ensure senior accountability, fines risk becoming little more than a cost of doing business. Directors remain insulated while operational teams are left to carry the can. National cyber resilience depends not just on systems and software, but on leadership, on culture and accountability at the very top. For those reasons, ahead of Bill Committee, we on this side of the House are examining how the legislation can be strengthened while continuing to support its core objectives. In the meantime, regulators must be properly equipped with the right powers, resources and clarity from Parliament on the law's intent. Sanctions must be applied swiftly and consistently, and guidance must be clear, so enforcement is credible and deterrence is real. The government should also look at how reporting obligations are calibrated. A one-size-fits-all approach may place disproportionate burdens on smaller firms, and it may be better to ensure reporting thresholds reflect the size, complexity and risk profile of an organisation. Equally, the funding of regulators must be transparent and predictable. There have to be safeguards against regulatory expansion for its own sake, and firm assurances that funds raised are reinvested directly into improving national cyber resilience, not absorbed by administrative overheads. While the bill rightly prioritises critical national infrastructure, it cannot afford to ignore high-risk sectors that sit beyond its immediate scope. There's also a major role for market-based solutions. Cyber insurance, sector-wide intelligence sharing and collaborative resilience initiatives can all complement regulation. These tools can reduce risk and improve preparedness without adding unnecessary legislative complexity. Finally, the review cycle set out in the bill may be too slow for the threat landscape we face and the pace of technological change. Annual or biennial reviews might allow Parliament to scrutinise effectiveness, respond to emerging threats and ensure the legislation remains fit for purpose. I'd like to finish by making some more general points about the government's approach to cyber security and resilience, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker. Issues about the risk of dependence and threat from adversaries. I see no evidence from this government that it is thinking with any clarity about the risks of long-term technological dependency and lock-in. In fact, quite the opposite. Large parts of our economy now depend on secure, high-quality digital infrastructure, a reliance that will only increase as AI advances. Whoever provides that infrastructure will wield huge future leverage. It was that reality which ultimately drove the change of heart over Chinese tech sitting in the core of our 5G telecom networks a few years ago. Now, however, the government is seemingly betting every chip on US hyperscalers. They provide our data centres. They supply the platforms on which government departments are now run. They, more often than not, are the ones winning all the government contracts. These investments will, of course, provide our companies with things they need, from compute power to increasingly sophisticated AI platforms. But the UK is doing little simultaneously to mitigate against our increased technological dependency. And when I say technological, we need to understand that technology is what we now run our defence systems, factories, energy networks and communications on. Technology is the plumbing of our nation. During September's much-crowed-about state visit by President Trump, this government was visibly begging for good economic headlines after the humiliating resignations of the Deputy Prime Minister and US Ambassador, not to mention the uncontainable mess of the Chancellor's first budget and the threat of her second. The US-UK tech partnership was the result, with a huge amount of smoke and mirrors deployed over what it actually contained. Whatever substance lay within it, we heard just before Christmas that it had been paused, used as leverage by the US while other trade negotiations are underway. I'm not criticising the US administration for skillfully playing its hand in its national interests. I'm asking this government rapidly to wake up to the reality of a new world in which the post-war settlement is coming to an end. A new world that's been giving clues to its existence for many years now, long before President Trump came into office. The United States remains a vital ally, but in this new era, Britain must be very clear-eyed about risk, the reality of hard power, and the need to protect our sovereign interests. Cyber risk requires as much thought about the fundamentals of plumbing as it does about the laws that try to manage how humans use or exploit technology. The UK government has a vast procurement budget for which our own firms ought to be able to make a successful bid. But UK Tech tells me consistently that for all the talk in the government's AI strategy of sovereign tech capability, they have not got a look in since Labour has been in power. I'm concerned that this bill does not introduce new, burdensome regulation for UK firms in a way that benefits non-UK incumbents with giant compliance teams and legal resources in a way that would exacerbate the risk of vendor lock-in. Let us turn to another risk. The private sector will have noticed that the new obligations within this bill broadly do not touch the public sector, where cyber risk remains red light flashingly large. Notwithstanding, as I say, the public cyber strategy that was thrown out today in implicit acknowledgement of that gaping hole. Knowing that the public sector holds such enormous cyber risk, this Labour government chooses not to minimise it, but to create a brand new one, a hulking great identity system mandated for anyone who wants a job, and now we hear possibly for newborn babies. Mandatory identity by stealth, not consent, and with no honesty about it. It is not to be against the ability of people to verify themselves digitally for banking or to access certain online services or to stop fraud, to think that Labour's mandated digital identity plan is a complete rotter. The Association of Digital Verification Professionals called what Labour inherited on digital identity a world-leading model for data sovereignty that digitised liberty rather than diluted it. The citizen, not government, in control. Now this naive government is crowding out private sector expertise and making everyone have one of these identities by stealth. It has no idea what this system will cost, and it will not be honest about what it will be used for. And what of the cybersecurity of this system? Well, the system on which this digital identity will be run was breached during red team testing last year. When I asked the Secretary of State if that system has now met the NCSC's cybersecurity standard, no answers came. Whistleblowers have continued to speak out about the vulnerabilities of the system, and there is no sense whatsoever from government that the dodgy digital identity plan will be paused until such point that they are confident about cybersecurity. Certainly.
Absolutely staggered, Madam Deputy Speaker, to hear the Shadow Minister talk about standard software testing practices as though someone's doing wrong by trying to penetrate systems and trying to find flaws in it. Isn't the whole point of software testing to find the flaws in the system and get them fixed, rather than parading them in front of the House of Commons as though it's some sort of failure?
I think the honourable gentleman is wilfully misinterpreting what I'm saying. There's not an issue with having systems tested. There is an issue with the fact that the system tests failed. And there is no evidence that the government has therefore acted to deal with those systemic failures. The whistleblowers continue to talk about the serious concerns about the structures on which the government's digital identity platform will be built. And he's sitting there looking absolutely outraged that I might suggest that there are some concerns about the cybersecurity risk of a national mandated digital identity platform. And personally, I find that absolutely extraordinary. The idea that I'm talking about my concerns that a system might be tested, of course, every system must be robustly tested. That is not the point I'm trying to make, and I think he is being willfully ludicrous in trying to suggest otherwise. So I asked Madam Deputy Speaker, can this Prime Minister run an economy? No. Can this Prime Minister keep promises? No. Can this Prime Minister control his backbenches? No. Can he control his front benches? No. So how on earth does anybody think he can run a secure digital identity system? So at the same time as risking technological lock-in by friendly allies, we're creating new vulnerabilities for adversaries to attack. Just before Christmas, UK intelligence agencies warned about increasing large-scale cyber espionage from China, targeting commercial and political information. We discovered from ministers that the Foreign Office itself was subject of a major cyber attack in October, which officials believe was carried out by Chinese hackers. This in the midst of a major row between the government and CPS over the prosecution of spies operating here in Parliament. We will be looking closely at this legislation for where government should be addressing this cyber reality with much greater force. An approach to cyber resilience that looks only at introducing new regulations and compliance burdens without thinking through risks like a mandated identity scheme, dependency on non-sovereign suppliers, the malign intent of other nations, and a failure to build up our own workforce and skills is one which will fail. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, we support this cyber... Certainly.
For my old friend, but as she's coming to the end of her remarks, I don't think I heard anything mentioned by the Minister about risks of cyber attacks on local government. That is another potentially juicy target for people who wish to cause major mischief. Does she agree?
Well, my honourable friend will be aware that this is outside the scope of the bill, but it is a very juicy target. There's much in the public sector that remains a very juicy target. And I think, as I say, in acknowledgement of those juicy targets, the government whipped out very quickly this morning a strategy that's meant to give us assurances about public sector resilience when it comes to cyber. And I'm not sure that it will provide much reassurance. And this is why I think it's important that we understand that this cyber bill can only be one part of a much wider arsenal that looks at tightening gaps where they exist, both in the private sector but also in the public sector. Certainly.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's really worth clarifying for the House that we've brought forward the government cyber security strategy this morning because the 2022 consultation that was brought forward by the previous Conservative government was not acted upon. Yeah. This government is acting on those threats, bringing forward a plan that we will then subsequently see through, and I think she should acknowledge that, or the Honourable Lady should acknowledge that.
Well, I welcome it, but I haven't actually had the chance to have a good look at it because the government always seems to publish these sorts of documents right at the last minute. It's remarkable. The only way to get any information out of this government is to apply some pressure in this House, and then remarkably things come flying out of the cupboard. And I will be very interested to see what this strategy looks like and whether it really is up to the challenge that faces us now. Since we were in government, the problems and risks of cyber have markedly increased because of the advent of AI technology that is changing the picture very, very rapidly, just as the defence picture is changing very, very rapidly. And my concern is that this government is not taking seriously enough the various defence and security challenges that face this House, prioritising spend on welfare payments and union payments and all other manner of things. And, you know, it's one thing to get a strategy out of the door, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's another thing to actually put in the measures that will implement the strategy. And I think basically what we've seen in the last 18 months is strategy documents and not a great deal of delivery. It's one of the reasons why the government is so rapidly losing public confidence. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, we do support this cyber bill in principle. The threat is real, growing, and it demands actions, but it can be seen as only a tool, not a cure-all. A government that's trying to close down gaps in one place while willfully opening up huge new risks in a different corner is being negligent in its approach. Further, if this legislation is to command confidence, it must be practical, proportionate, and genuinely effective. Without meaningful improvements, this bill risks placing new burdens on business while delivering only marginal gains when it comes to our national resilience. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility between government, regulators, industry and the public, but leadership must come from the top, and that is where this bill currently falls short. With the private sector taking the lion's share of the load while gaping holes remain in public sector cyber defences, the bill begs obvious questions about the confidence citizens should have in flagship government projects like the Prime Minister's mandatory digital identity. As it stands, this bill would not have prevented high-profile cyber shutdowns like Jaguar Land Rovers. It does little to address the chronic vulnerabilities in the public sector, and it certainly will not make Labour's dodgy ID database any more secure. This is why, as this bill makes its journey through Parliament, we will be pressing this government to ensure it delivers genuine security, proper accountability, and raise cyber defences across the board, while taking them to task on major mistakes like mandatory ID. For cybersecurity is no longer a niche compliance exercise. It is about protecting the fundamental economic and defence interests of our nation.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I start by welcoming this bill. It's a serious step forward in protecting the United Kingdom from the cyber attacks that we face daily, and a great number each day. But this legislation, as we just heard from my right honourable friend, is long overdue. Yep. Back in April 2022, when a consultation had just started in January of that year, the then government identified issues. And I was slightly bemused that I consider my right honourable friend not to have covered that in her speech. But there were serious issues and limitations identified through that consultation. And so it was then a further over 2 years, during which the previous government failed to act. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, as we heard from my right honourable friend, Minister, this has proved very costly, as he illustrated in his speech. The past couple of years we have seen that cybersecurity is not just paramount to our everyday lives, it is crucial. It ensures food on our supermarket shelves. It's the lights staying on. It's critical to every corner of the UK. But now we have to move at pace, not just with this legislation, but I would urge us to go further. For if we are to protect ourselves from our adversaries, we need to develop a true whole-of-society approach to cybersecurity and start a national conversation on security at home. This legislation is clearly a first step, an important first step, a first chapter, if you will. But there must be many more written if we are going to seriously address our national security. And I mean here our social and economic security. Increasingly, this past decade, we have seen a blurring of war and peace with the emergence of hybrid warfare and the widening of the grey zone. We are living in a cyber no man's land where states or state-sponsored actors, proxies, can act with relative ease and impunity, leaving the world a more dangerous place. And it is the cyber realm that is and will remain a key battleground. And it is one we must seize. We, the United Kingdom, need to wake up to this, and I mean every one of us, particularly with the development of AI and quantum computing and the extraordinary threats that will come from those developments. Because when it comes to being the target of these cyber attacks, the United Kingdom, Madam Deputy Speaker, now ranks third of all nations globally. In 2024 alone, the National Cybersecurity Centre, the NCSC, handled an average of 4 major serious attacks every week. These are the really serious attacks. And the impact on the economy is staggering. In that same year, it cost the British economy £15 billion, or 0.5% of GDP. And when you're trying to increase GDP by 1% or 2%, whatever, you think that that hit of 0.5%, how significant that is. Now, while 43% of businesses have reported having any kind of security breach or attack in the last 12 months, for medium and large businesses, this figure rises to 67 and 74%. Every attack inflicts more pain on the United Kingdom PLC, and that means lower economic growth and lower tax receipts to fund our public services. And the effects, as we heard earlier, ripple through our whole society. We were talking about Jaguar Land Rover just then, and the attack this summer. Of course, it cost the company an estimated £500 million, affected over 5,000 businesses and risked thousands of jobs, with many of those employees based in my constituency of Warwick and Leamington. So the impact is significant right across. It would be cafes, restaurants, pubs, shops, all these being affected by the downturn that was immediately led with the shutdown of the factories. Now, there was the attack also on Collins Aerospace that was referenced or alluded to earlier that crippled Heathrow Airport, and I think Stansted was affected, but less so, that scuppered thousands of hard-earned family holidays in autumn of last year, and the ramifications for the travel sector were significant. Of course, it's not just businesses. We've seen the attacks on councils, as we've heard, and charities. Even the British Library, which was knocked out 2 years ago, which has meant that so much of our research potential in this country has been impacted across our higher education university institutions, really significantly affecting the UK. The Electoral Commission got knocked out by an attack by Chinese state-sponsored actors. And there have been so many others. Even our NHS is not safe. As my right honourable friend mentioned about the attack on Synovis. But then last year, over 11,000 NHS appointments were lost due to cyber attacks. The attack in June 2024 on London hospitals by the Russian group Kiln saw 1,100 cancer treatments delayed, 2,000 outpatient appointments cancelled, and more than 1,000 operations postponed, and tragically, the death of a patient. The message from across our international partners and the UK security services is clear, and I'll give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. With regard to the attack on the NHS, prior to being elected to this place, I worked for 10 years in health and social care, and so I witnessed that attack taking place, and nothing could be a more stark demonstration of the impact on productivity that cyber attacks have on our country and our society. There was a meeting of senior, at the time, CCG and other health trust executives in Hertfordshire, and one by one they were forced to leave the room, like lights blinking out, as the impact of the attack became clear. So does he agree with me that this bill is essential in order that our legislation keeps up to date with the new methods of attack that bad actors are using on our state and infrastructure as online technology evolves?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention and his lived experience, really, through this. I can only relate to having spoken to organisations through the Business and Trade Select Committee, but also in my role on the Committee for National Security Strategy, where hearing from those organisations that have been impacted, how paralysing it is, the immediate aftermath of such an attack, and how it challenges an organisation. So these kind of red team, blue team scenarios are crucial that they get played out. But when it's actually happening and you are facing an entire shutdown of your systems, it is really very difficult to navigate. But this is where many have talked about the change of culture that is needed. We do need to embrace this urgently, and as he says, that experience in the NHS was good example. But these attacks, Madam Deputy Speaker, are the new normal, and we must be better prepared. In September 2024, led by both the FBI and the NSA, the United Kingdom, Germany, Estonia, Canada, and a plethora of other allies released their clearest articulation of the threat posed by Russia and Putin in particular. They said, and I quote, "Russia are responsible for computer network operations against global targets for the purposes of espionage, sabotage, and reputational harm since at least 2020. And the NCSC annual review in 2024 called the landscape diffuse and dangerous, while the 2025 review could not have been clearer. It's time to act, they said, in the defining text on the front cover. Richard Horne, head of the NCSC, said, and I quote, "Empty shells and stalled production lines are a stark reminder that cyber attacks no longer just affect computers and data, but real businesses, real products, and real lives. The recent cyber attacks must act as a wake-up call." And just last week, Andrew Bailey, Governor of the Bank of England, said cyber attacks were one of the biggest threats to UK financial stability and stressed the critically important need for collaborative defence. The reality should be clear to everyone here. The front line is everywhere. It's our phone, it's at our desk, it's our businesses, it's our infrastructure, it's even here at the heart of our democracy. And such a threat requires a whole-of-society response. Of course, we are not the first to have been targeted. Back in 2007, what's that, 18 years ago, Russia launched a determined cyber attack on Estonia. It was a damaging and debilitating to their society and economy. The cyber attack was a call to action for Estonia, and they responded at pace. It brought about cultural change, which has been talked about in the Chamber in the opening remarks. They overhauled their legal, political, and strategic framework, even looking at their education, and adopted a whole-of-society approach to cybersecurity and developed a serious public-private partnership to counter the threats posed by Russia. Now, no doubt the Minister will have looked at this case in more detail to understand what learnings could be applied here and to our cybersecurity strategy more widely to ensure whole-of-society resilience. Because the reality, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that cyber attacks target the weakest link. And so it was welcome to hear my right honourable friend talk about the initiatives with the FTSE 350 companies and some of the smaller businesses and how they should be engaging with these threats. Madam Deputy Speaker, it cannot be acceptable that the most popular password in the United Kingdom is, and I quote, password. It is ridiculous. Every one of us must act as guardian against our cyber adversaries. Turning to the bill itself, there are valuable and desperately needed provisions laid out. The extended scope of the bill is hugely welcome, bringing in data centres, large load controllers and managed service providers under the NIS regulations protects more of the economy from cyber attacks. And I'm particularly pleased to see the inclusion of MSPs, given the vulnerabilities that organisations often face from external IT suppliers or their supply base. The amendments to the regulatory framework are a positive step forward. Improving the reporting of incidents will allow the government to respond at pace and be agile to the evolving threats and shared vulnerabilities. That said, during the last Parliament, the Joint Committee of National Security Strategy, which I now chair, called for one cross-sector cyber regulator. And I would echo those calls, as I believe it will enable far greater regulation and enforcement. Finally, the improved resilience and security enabled through additional powers granted to the Secretary of State are crucial to enable the government to act quickly in real times of crisis. Now, despite all the positive aspects of the bill, and I congratulate ministers after the years of dithering by its predecessor government, it does leave large parts of the economy outside its scope. As I've mentioned already, how can we incorporate a whole-of-society approach to cybersecurity like that of Estonia? There will be many different levers for the government to pull. Now, this bill, I believe, is just one part, and I trust that others will follow swiftly. It's worth noting that the EU's NIS2 directive is broadly parallel to the bill before us. However, the EU does go further on cyber resilience, having added sectors such as manufacturing, food distribution, and wastewater. Now, having witnessed such devastating attacks in these sectors this past year, I would urge us to act swiftly with further legislation to address these areas. Madam Deputy Speaker, in summary, I would just restate I absolutely welcome the bill, and the three key pillars of the legislation, the expanded scope, improving regulation and strengthening resilience, are hugely welcome, as is the importance of experience, reporting and sharing by victims. The cyber attacks we've suffered this past year must be our inflection point, our call to action. Like Estonia's in 2007, we have an opportunity to reinvigorate our cyber defences and ensure the whole of society is resilient. And now, the Shadow Minister mentioned about the digital ID. What I would gently say is that the opportunity was seized upon by Estonia at that time. They since introduced digital ID. It is secure, as it is in Denmark. They looked at the opportunity presented by that challenge, that attack that they faced, and those systems do work. It's been demonstrated by both those countries. Now, as the NCS annual review rightly asserts, the UK's cyber security is a shared responsibility where everyone needs to play a part. As parliamentarians, we have a duty to raise the salience of this and bring about a national conversation to ensure everyone plays their part. Finally, may I gently encourage the Minister to go further and faster and to look at the broader cyber landscape as Estonia did and the EU is doing with its NIS2 legislation, and to look to introduce legislation to cover food production and distribution, manufacturing and other critical sectors. But as I say, this bill is an important first step in that development, and I look forward to working constructively with the Minister to ensure that the UK and its citizens are secure and resilient to any future cyber attacks.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and a happy new year to yourself and everyone else in the chamber. It is a pleasure to finally address the long-awaited Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill. And indeed, as has been mentioned today, the importance of this is significant. The National Cyber Security Centre reported that nationally significant cyber incidents have more than doubled since the year before. This past year's surge in cyber attacks, from supply chains to hospitals to critical infrastructure has made one fact clear. There is no economic or societal security without cyber security. 14.7 billion. That's what cyber attacks cost the UK economy annually. And behind that are attacks on companies like Jaguar Land Rover, M&S, and more importantly, the impact on the real economy, thousands of jobs, businesses hanging in the balance, and it's impacting our public services and our private data. And as the Minister mentioned this morning, the NHS Synovis ransomware attack resulted in more than 11,000 postponed appointments and procedures, and has even been linked to one patient's death, which is attributed to that delay. This matters. We must do all that we can to upgrade protection on our security because jobs, economy and lives depend on it. And our economy, imagine it, if you will, as a house, is under attack. The Liberal Democrats welcome the bill's intent to upgrade our home security. The addition of data centres, managed service providers and large load controllers mean we're building stronger fences and that companies who have a master key to all of our doors have stronger security, while the wiring has also been upgraded and the alarm system is getting an upgrade with increased incident reporting. But the bill is leaving the back doors wide open by leaving out key sectors. Our alarm system isn't sure when it's supposed to ring, and we've got the companies who have the keys to our doors using our house, asking for simplicity and clarity and support so that they can do their job properly. While no single cybersecurity legislation can act as a silver bullet, these are the gaps that we must address. By failing to take the whole economy approach, which was mentioned by the Honourable Member, we're leaving out public sector and economically significant retail sectors like retail and manufacturing, and indeed this bill therefore leaves the back doors wide open. The bill's stated aims are to protect the organisations so essential that their disruption would affect our daily lives. Yet the government apparently doesn't consider its own public services, local authorities, essential enough for protection. The £10 million Red Council incident proves voluntary schemes are failing local authorities. But after this bill passes, government institutions and councils will still lack statutory protections and the ring-fence funding, and this is all while council budgets are getting tighter. I have no doubt that members of the public whose data in the form of electoral rolls or social care records sit in these systems would object to their inclusion. But we're also talking about, as has been mentioned, a potential digital ID system, a mandatory ID system for the whole of this country, which the government have already mentioned would be built by a homemade technology. Where will the cyber protection be in that? What's more, leaving out sectors like retail and manufacturing mean that JLS and M&S cyber attacks remain out of scope. These are significant sectors, major employers, major parts of our supply chains, and handle significant amounts of personal data. As it stands, this bill marks a failure of ambition. The government claimed in response to a letter that we sent on the topic that they do not need to wait or rely on legislation to implement cyber security requirements within the public sector, and will instead use the government action plan to ensure the very same requirements written in this bill will be applied to the public sector. My question, Madam Deputy Speaker, is why do we have to have this two-tiered approach? Why leave out an economically and socially significant sector such as the public sector? So does the Minister agree that we need mandatory cyber security standards for these absent sectors of our society, governance and economy? If we're serious about national resilience, about protecting citizens' data, about aligning with European partners, then let us vote on it here, in this chamber, with full transparency and accountability in the primary legislation. A further critical gap in this bill is the failure to embed security by design, to ensure, and also a lack of clear accountability where this should be board-led, to ensure that each lock, each door, each window of our house is built securely. In 2019, the NCSC published design principles. Last October, the government itself launched a Secure by Design framework as core to its cyber security standard, yet this bill not only excludes government from critical national infrastructure, it abandons this key principle, failing to mention by design. This matters especially given the research by ISC2 suggesting that skills shortages are the #1 challenge for complying with cyber regulation in the UK, with 88% of respondents experiencing at least one cybersecurity breach as a result of skills shortages. This is also a missed opportunity for our economy and our cybersecurity sector. Prioritising security by design would alternatively provide the baseline protection our critical infrastructure desperately needs. So what what considerations do the government have to ensure this security by design? An effective regulation doesn't just mean future-proofing. It must be workable. While we welcome the expanded incident reporting, the current definition risks creating significant regulatory burden, over-reporting that will overwhelm rather than strengthen our cybersecurity systems. Those coming to upgrade our security are not being given the clear directions. The current definition of reportable incident is so broad that it could even link to every phishing email. So how will the NCSC feasibly manage this administrative burden when the alarm may be ringing non-stop? Other critical terms lack clarity for the industry, including managed service provider and the criteria for digital critical suppliers, as highlighted by Tech UK and others. These aren't just technical details to be ironed out later. They're the difference between a bill that works and one that doesn't, and the industry needs clarity on how to comply. So will the Minister work with us and industry to tighten these definitions so it's workable? Will the Minister consider the best way to ensure simplicity and effectiveness for incident reporting? Furthermore, what is being done to support homegrown cybersecurity in the UK? What is being done to defend from hostile foreign interference? With one of the latest defence contracts going to Palantir, what is being done to support UK tech? Would the government support a digital sovereign strategy as highlighted by the Open Rights Group? This is yet another missed opportunity to support our domestic tech sector at a time when we should be building UK cybersecurity capabilities and creating high-skilled jobs here at home. How can we claim to be serious about national resilience when the very infrastructure protecting our critical systems could be entirely outsourced abroad? And supporting UK tech and businesses isn't just about the providers in this bill. It's about the thousands of SMEs who form the backbone of our economy. For those few SMEs and startups who are directly affected by this bill, it creates a regulatory thicket of overlapping rules, different timelines and multiple bodies. Cybersecurity is complicated, and for this legislation to work, it must be simple and easily implementable for UK SMEs. So what support will there be for those SMEs and startups that are impacted? Furthermore, it would be remiss not to mention the wider cybercrime landscape. SMEs make up 99.8% of UK businesses and are often the most vulnerable link in cyber supply chains. The NCC Group confirms manufacturing, retail and leisure, dominated by SMEs, were the most targeted for ransomware in 2024. This is why the Liberal Democrats are calling on the government to establish a digital safety net for SMEs, a nationwide first responder service that provides free point-of-use support to small businesses that have been victims of a cyber attack. Australia is already doing this, providing person-to-person support during and after attacks. So if Australia can do that, why can't we? And on top of this, Madam Deputy Speaker, the biggest threat is actually fraud and costs the economy hundreds of billions a year. 2/3 of all fraud begins online, and many through social media companies with no liability, which is why the Liberal Democrats are calling for social media platforms to be made financially viable for fraud on their sites, creating a clear line of accountability for criminal activity. More than that, fraud is a cybersecurity issue. It exploits weak systems and inadequate protections. Families lose life savings, elderly people fall victims to sophisticated phishing, small businesses shut down. While we have the cybersecurity bill that protects infrastructure while leaving the back door open, it also ignores the billions of savings lost and livelihoods amended due to online fraud the government must address in its long-awaited fraud strategy. We cannot protect systems but abandon our businesses and everyday people. This bill is progress, but it's not the finish line. The cyber threat is real, evolving and urgent. The Liberal Democrats will work constructively to strengthen it through amendments, but we must ensure that we're not leaving the back door open, that we're future-proofing our security. We owe it to our businesses, families and our national security to get this right. Thank you.
Dame Onwurah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and a Happy New Year to you and to all in the House and to the staff as well. And it is appropriate that we begin 2026 by talking about an issue in this House which is of grave importance to all our constituents, but which is not talked about enough here or, for that matter, across the country. And that is, of course, cyber security. At the start of this century, indeed this millennium, only a quarter of the UK and 6% of the world were online. Today, almost 98% of the UK and 68% of the world use the internet. According to Ofcom, we each spend between 3 and 6 hours online per day, depending on our age and interests. And for many, perhaps too many, life is lived online. And even when you're not online, the infrastructure of your life is. Whether you use online banking or not, your bank account details will be stored in some cloud somewhere. The same is true of your health records, your electricity bills, your child's school records, the safety sensors on our nuclear power plants, your Christmas Marks and Spencer's order, your last Uber ride. The Prime Minister said that national security is the first responsibility of any government. I hope the House can all agree that government must ensure the security of the British people as we go about our increasingly online lives, and that previous governments have not taken this issue seriously enough or done enough to protect our citizens. So that's why, as chair of the Science, Innovation and Technology Select Committee and a self-confessed tech evangelist, I welcome this legislation. And I'm pleased to see other members of the Select Committee here. The committee has not examined cybersecurity in detail specifically, but we have expressed significant concerns with regard to public sector data management, for example, after the Afghan data breach came to light. Currently, as we have heard, the UK's only cost-cutting cybersecurity legislation is that inherited from the European Union. Since Brexit, the European Union has updated these regulations, leaving the UK working under an outdated framework. Meanwhile, nationally significant cyber incidents, as measured by the National Cybersecurity Centre, more than doubled last year. The NCSC also warns that AI will almost certainly increase both the scale and impact of attacks. And let us remember that when everyone can code, thanks to AI, everyone can hack. And we need to respond to that, because these attacks threaten not only our national security, but our economy. And in November, the Bank of England cited for the first time a major cyber attack, that on Jaguar Land Rover, as a factor in its decision to hold interest rates. The JLR breach is estimated to have cost the economy, almost £2 billion. So that's why I welcome this bill, which seeks to expand the scope to new sectors, making regulators more effective and grant the government additional powers to respond to the ever-evolving threat landscape. However, I must be clear, there is more to be done. My main concerns relate to the scope of the legislation. So, as we have heard, the bill brings data centres, large load controllers and managed service providers in scope of regulations, which is right, and grants competent authorities the power to designate critical suppliers who are vital to the services provided. Yet, as we have heard, some of our most economically significant sectors remain outside of its core obligations. Retail is the UK's largest private sector employer, handles huge volumes of sensitive customer data, runs complex supply chains, relies on legacy IT systems often, making it a prime target for cyber criminals. Yet it is outside the scope of the bill. So the legislation would not have done anything to prevent the attacks on Marks and Spencer's, the Co-op or Jaguar Land Rover, which impacted our constituents so much. So now I welcome the government's plan to promote the new cyber governance code of practice to improve preparedness in sectors like retail. But even after high-profile breaches, cybersecurity is still not prioritised at board level. And a recent report by the Information Systems Audit and Control Association, IASCA, shows only 56% of company boards take cybersecurity seriously enough, and that is after JLR. So the Minister, in his excellent speech, did say that it was up to private sector companies to manage their own cybersecurity. I agree with that, but I wonder if you'd address how the government will assess that is actually happening, and what the government will do, if there is evidence that companies are not managing their their cyber security effectively, and that our citizens are not adequately protected as a result. So without a way to monitor and enforce government standards, large parts of our economy remain exposed. IESCA recommends a statutory review of the uptake and effectiveness of the Cyber Governance Code, powers for regulators to mandate periodic external resilience assessments, including penetration testing and scenario-based exercises, as well as requiring organisations to appoint an accountable individual who meets defined competency standards. Now, government departments, local administrations and public bodies, such as the BBC, are also outside the scope. So the bill does nothing to address long-standing weaknesses in public sector data management, which have been highlighted by my select committee. Now, as the National Audit Office declared last year, the cyber threat to the UK government is severe and advancing quickly. We had the cyber attack on the FCDO in October, which is a clear example of how rapidly these attacks are escalating. We need greater rigour to prevent future attacks and build the public trust that is needed for the implementation of programmes such as Digital ID and other digital transformation projects. Now, I've not been able to study in any detail the action plan which the government published this morning, but I will look for clear measures of success when it comes to implementing the government's action plan and ways in which cultural change, which we have spoken about in this debate, which is needed within the public sector as well as the private sector, will be achieved. And the Secretary of State recently told my committee that the government would, and I quote, assess the improvements the cybersecurity bill brings to the UK cyber defences through post-implementation reviews, regular engagement with NIS regulators and industry, and monitoring the incidence and costs of any future cyber attacks. So I would welcome the Minister's clarifying where these commitments reflect the statutory requirements within the bill, clauses 20 to 22, or the additional policy commitments and how they will be funded. Finally, small businesses. So the bill rightly focuses on critical national infrastructure, but as we all know, you're only as secure as your weakest link, and the supply chains for our critical national infrastructure involve many small businesses who may or may not be within the scope of this bill, depending on whether and how and whether they are designated as such. Can the Minister say how quickly he envisages businesses knowing whether they have been designated as critical suppliers? I support the bill's proposals for mandatory cyber incident reporting. I recognise the value of government collecting and publishing data on ransomware and other attacks. But I share concerns raised by the ABI and other speakers about the feasibility of small businesses meeting the proposed two-stage reporting, particularly submitting full reports to regulators and the NCSC within 72 hours. We have seen that Cyber Essentials take-up, so the programme to help businesses, and particularly small businesses, achieve the cyber security they need. Cyber Essentials take-up is low amongst businesses. As I said, only 33,000 in 2024. Cyber insurance take-up is also low amongst small businesses, so leaving them vulnerable both in terms of skills and protection. Can the Minister say a little bit about plans to address this? If this bill is to succeed, implementation must be done with industry, not to industry, so I echo Tech UK's calls for clearer guidance on information sharing and additional support to help small businesses meet compliance costs. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope in his closing the Minister can address the following points specifically. Will the government consider extending the bill to economically significant businesses outside its current scope and empowering regulators to mandate stronger cyber governance and resilience assessments? Will the government consider including direct measures to strengthen cybersecurity and resilience in public administrations, including local authorities and government departments? Will the government clarify whether the post-implementation reviews, monitoring of cyber incidents and engagements with regulators and industries she has outlined to my committee reflect the existing statutory requirements within the bill? Will the Minister ensure that the new cyber incident reporting and information sharing requirements are implemented in a practical and proportionate way for small businesses? Will they take steps to support cyber insurance take-up? And finally, will they ensure there is clear guidance on information sharing requirements and provide additional support to help businesses meet compliance costs? Madam Deputy Speaker, we need to talk more about cyber and cyber security, and I have not touched on some of the national security implications, which the Minister and my honourable friend, the member for Warwick and Leamington, described very well in his speech. But this is clear. This is an issue which is only going to get more important, both from a national security, an economic security, and a personal safety and security perspective. Now, if we can get the implementation of this bill right, extending it as necessary, working with industry, supporting smaller businesses, supporting public trust and public security, then I hope we can build a nation that is not just cyber secure today, but prepared for the many challenges which lie ahead.
Sir Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady for Honourable Member for Newcastle upon Tyne, who has brought tremendous expertise to this debate. In my previous role overseeing national resilience and cross-government coordination of national security threats, cybersecurity was probably the one area that caused me the greatest number of sleepless nights. There's been a lot of talk in recent months and years about the increased need to defend the realm and the steps that need to be taken to address the defence of the realm. We all know from past experience that the first line of attack of any attack on the defence of the realm is highly likely to be through cyber attacks. And indeed, in a completely different context, we only need to look at the public comments of the President of the United States a couple of days ago in terms of the first steps that the United States took in its intervention in Venezuela. He talked about capabilities that the United States had to knock out power supply there. And if we look at our adversaries, particularly Russia, North Korea and Iran, we can see that they are actively inculcating and encouraging environments where cyber attacks can be planned and take place, whether that's explicitly private sector individuals or with the connivance of the state. A deliberate grey zone is created there with the desire to increase knowledge of the risks to cyber in the United Kingdom and our allies, and to carry out penetrative attacks to that effect. And we are likely to see this grey zone warfare continue to increase as a result of actions that we see in Ukraine and elsewhere. And we just have to look at our own experience of this. If one looks at what happened after the JLR attack, and many honourable members have made this point, how the initial attack rapidly cascaded and affected many others in the supply chain, and certainly from the government's own research and testing of this, and again it's in the public domain, that one rapidly sees that one cyber attack can cascade into other areas. So, for example, when we tested the impact of a cyber attack on our electricity system, that rapidly cascades into our water system, which is dependent on electricity. Clearly, it also rapidly cascades into our transport system. So before long, a small cyber attack becomes a very, very large cyber attack. And in common with most other, in fact all other advanced countries, the United Kingdom is highly exposed to cyber attacks, a point that I made repeatedly from the dispatch box in this House. I do welcome that the steps that the Minister has outlined today and this legislation. I would just like to gently caution against what the Minister said, and I don't think it was his intention, but he said that this legislation will fix the cybersecurity problem. It won't fix the cybersecurity problem. No single piece of legislation is ever going to fix the cybersecurity problem, nor is this a question of good guys and bad guys. The last government did nothing, this government's doing nothing. Each government has to a fresh look at the challenges of cybersecurity and take necessary and proportionate steps to address the risks of cybersecurity. So in that context, I just wanted to make a few... Yes, I will give way to the Honourable Member.
I thank the Right Honourable Member for giving way. Given his extensive experience, it's very interesting to hear what he says. If he had his time again, and this is not to criticise the previous government, but if in the here and now, does he think that this area needs an absolute focus from across government, but from across society, because it is such a crucial part of our defence?
Yes, I totally agree with him. And indeed, that is what the National Cybersecurity Centre, working in conjunction with the last government, and I believe, and I know, continuing under the current government, that's why the National Cybersecurity Centre set out the whole-of-government approach. It can't just be the actions of individual government ministers or individual actors in the private sector. The whole of government needs to act together. In terms of further steps we could and should have taken, this goes to the intervention I made on the Minister. I do think that more pressure needs to be brought to bear on ministers in terms of their accountability for cyber security. And I fear that the risk, if we don't put this into primary legislation, it's something that can slip further and further down ministers' in trays, whilst ministers have a desire to address it. Other more pressing, immediate problems distract their attention. So some constructive suggestions about things that could be improved in respect of this proposed legislation. The first is this point about many of the powers being delegated to secondary legislation on ministerial direction. I don't have a problem with that. I think that's it's essential that we have a framework piece of legislation and then we have the flexibility to allow secondary legislation to be brought forward to address challenges as they arise. I would, though, urge that ministers undertake a meaningful and mandatory consultation on any secondary legislation that comes forward so that businesses and others can contribute to it. I would also caution against ministers devolving and forgetting to regulators their duties in respect of cyber security. Too often I've seen this, that, and this is again with governments of both colours, that regulators are empowered to address cyber security problems or any other problems. They then charge off in one direction. They fail to take into account questions such as proportionality, so the impact of these regulations versus the economic burden of them, and Parliament ceases to have a significant role and ministers cease to have a significant role. So I would urge ministers to keep a tight grip on regulators and the instructions that they give them. I would also be a little cautious about some of the arguments made by other honourable members about the need to constantly expand the scope of this legislation to further and further areas of the private sector. It's all very easy for us in this chamber to talk about the need for further legislation. When one is a small business faced with a huge piece of legislation, being required to interpret it, it looks a very, very daunting prospect. So my preference would be to continue the sort of cooperation that we've seen through the whole of society approach that the NCSC has advocated. Also, in terms of proportionality of this, I would urge ministers to embrace AI, the opportunities that using AI, for example, to triage incoming attacks, to avoid duplication. I think there's a lot that can be done in that area in terms of streamlining the system. On the flip side of AI, I think we have to take very, very seriously the risk that agentic artificial intelligence poses in terms of cyber attacks. And it appears that we reached an inflection point in November last year, November 2025, when Anthropic reported disrupting what it described as the first large-scale cyber espionage campaign executed largely via agentic AI. We are likely to see much, much more of this. So I'd welcome from the Minister in his concluding remarks what the government intends to do to ensure that we keep up with this threat, because we are only in the foothills of the risk that agentic AI poses. Further to this point on the role of the public sector, 40% of incidents handled by the National Cybersecurity Centre when I was the responsible minister were from the public sector. So I do question the exclusion of the public sector from this. I appreciate there's this plan that the government has announced. I haven't had a chance to look at the plan, but I can imagine broadly what will be contained in it. I think the key thing, though, is what's the stick that is applied to public officials and ministers outside the core government departments responsible for this to make sure that they actually take their responsibilities seriously. So I think some legislative proposals may be needed in that area. Similarly, in relation to budgets for this, again, the core responsible departments, so the Cabinet Office and the DCIT, will prioritise cybersecurity. I fear that other government departments may not. So I think there is a strong argument for ring-fencing cybersecurity budgets for all departments, so it can't be transferred to more pressing short-term problems, as was often the case, particularly, for example, in the NHS. I also think it's very important that we don't overlook the basics. It's very easy to talk about legislation. It's very easy to talk in high-level terms about threats. Probably the single biggest thing we could do in this country to deal with cyber risks is to make sure that every time, every single business and every single private individual gets one of those annoying pings on their phone that says you need to upgrade your software to the latest operating system, same with your PCs and your iPads and so on. That's being done by providers because they know that there is a cyber risk there and it's a patch to address it. If that patch is dealt with immediately, that can have a huge effect in terms of the resilience of the whole of society, and that's a message that the NCSC constantly puts out. I think we also need to look at our resilience as society as a whole for when we have a major cyber attack. Now, we have had major cyber attacks, but they have tended to be just in one sector, albeit with cascading effects, as was with the case with JLR. We haven't yet had a whole-of-society cyber attack. That is one that either flows out of control from a criminal attack or is a deliberate attack from a hostile state that cascades widely across all of society, affecting our electricity, water supplies and so on. I fear it is only a matter of time that will happen, and I think we do need to look at the resilience of individuals to that, whether that's the ability to have non-analog systems such as electric torches and battery-powered torches and so on. I think more work, which I started as a minister, needs to be done in that space. And I also think we need to look at the question of emergency communications. Certainly my experience, I think that public sector broadcasters such as the BBC are not required to take emergency communications from government in such situations. I think that is a loophole that could be exposed in such a situation. And finally, just more broadly in terms of resilience, again, we're at the foothills of the impact of AI. We are going to see vast impacts in terms of employment, how people can lead meaningful lives as AI advances more and more rapidly. And in terms of resilience for our society, I think this House needs to have a much wider debate, not for this piece of legislation, but more generally about how we address these epoch-changing challenges that we're facing. So, in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think this is a welcome piece of legislation. It's an important step forward. There are very important challenges which my right honourable friend, the lead spokesperson for the opposition, correctly highlighted that needed to be addressed as this legislation passes through the House. But I think it is an important step forward, but it's only one step, and once this legislation is over, we need to be prepared to return to this issue again and again and again.
Anna Gelderd.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am pleased to support this bill as the MP for South East Cornwall, a constituency of hard-working rural and coastal communities where digital access remains a problem and where long distances between services and few alternatives when systems fail. As we know, digital connectivity is a growing necessity for daily life, from traditional farming and fishing businesses to carers supporting vulnerable residents. Access to online job sites, online government websites, and access to NHS services and emergency support are all part of our new daily existence. So reliable digital infrastructure, one that is protected from disruption and from attack, is essential for our economy, for our public services and our community safety. That's why I'm supportive of the action that this government has taken to improve the lives of my communities. Actions such as the Digital Inclusion Fund, which Labour has put in place to tackle the barriers that stop people getting online in the first place. The rollout of Project Gigabit, ensuring that rural and hard-to-reach areas are not left behind. And the Shared Rural Network, an important landmark partnership between government and mobile network operators that Labour continues to support to eliminate so-called not spots, which I have to say I know only too well in South East Cornwall, and improve 4G coverage across rural areas like mine. Improved connectivity and cybersecurity can support small businesses, enables remote working, improves access to those NHS services we all need, and helps young people build their futures through online training, job opportunities and government support. It can also strengthen our rural resilience, ensuring communities stay connected during emergencies and are better able to adapt to future challenges. My goal for South East Cornwall is to become a digitally connected, resilient and safe constituency where no one is left behind because of their rural postcode. And I'm pleased to have been raising constituents' concerns with ministers and working with them to improve this for local residents. Those digital systems must also be secure. Cyber attacks carry real costs for both individual businesses and our wider economy. Businesses in South East Cornwall work hard to provide those services, create local jobs and support our local communities, and there are practical steps that businesses can take. The National Cyber Security Centre provides excellent guidance, but it also matters that businesses know that their government is acting to protect them as they navigate the growing risks that online work faces. This is why I welcome the action that this bill takes to strengthen our cyber resilience. And I ask the Minister, what is being done on recovery and response planning should incidents occur, as the reality for rural and coastal communities is that outages often last longer and the impacts are felt more sharply. The bill also presents an opportunity to grow skills, learning and employment across the country. Improving cyber security standards increases demand for skilled professionals. It creates pathways into good jobs and long-term careers. That matters for us in South East Cornwall, where we want our young people to see a future locally without needing to leave to succeed. It also matters for diversity. Our services are stronger when they are designed and protected by people with different backgrounds, different experiences and different perspectives. Work in this area can open the doors for young girls and women into STEM careers and help break down the long-standing barriers that are being felt by women underrepresented in tech, whether at entry level, in mid-career progression or in leadership roles. The Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology recently welcomed the Women in Tech Task Force to bring government and industry together to identify and dismantle those exact barriers, and I look forward to seeing the benefits reaching the women and girls in South East Cornwall. It is also important to recognise that cyber resilience is now a key element of our national security and our defence readiness. Staying up to date and agile is essential, particularly as advances in AI and quantum computing create new methods for testing, for strengthening and securing our systems, but also present new challenges that we must face. We have world-class research facilities in the UK with brilliant minds that can support our national security and ensure that the UK is at the forefront and prepared for those future attacks. The work that this government is doing through the bill updates the UK's existing frameworks so that we can respond to new and emerging threats and better protect our communities, as well as safeguarding sensitive information and personal data. But of course there is room for further work in the future, and with the nationally important Devonport dockyard just across the river from South East Cornwall, many of my local residents cross the Tamar each day to work on site, and a serious cyber attack could disrupt supply chains, it could compromise secure communications and undermine operational readiness. with real consequences for local safety, my local livelihoods and our national defence. So supply chain resilience is especially important here in South East Cornwall, as many Cornish businesses support larger providers in defence, energy and infrastructure. So ensuring that our services and our local systems are resilient protects both local suppliers and national partners, and it's essential that the UK defends itself and protects security at home and abroad. So can I ask the Minister how you looked into creating clear expectations on those wider supply chain cyber resilience, practical support for smaller suppliers such as those in South East Cornwall, and strong incident recovery planning so that both major defence infrastructure and the SMEs that support it are protected? For South East Cornwall, this bill speaks to resilience in the broadest sense. It supports secure services, a stronger economy, new opportunities for skills and jobs, new opportunities for women and girls, and the confidence that the systems we rely on every day are protected. So I'm glad to support it and the action that this government is taking to keep our digital future safe.
Hear, hear. David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome the opportunity to speak at the second reading of the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, a bill that addresses one of the most defining national security challenges of our age, and we've heard many valuable contributions from honourable and right honourable members across this House so far today. Before entering Parliament, Madam Deputy Speaker, I spent several years working to protect our country from cyber risks. My background in software engineering gave me a rare view under the bonnet of the systems that now underpin almost every aspect of our daily lives. I saw firsthand how our digital infrastructure works and just how vulnerable much of it remains. I really love that work, and I'm proud to say that as a country we are genuine world leaders. But I would be dishonest if I said that it did not leave me deeply worried at times. Not because of any single threat or actor, but because of the sheer scale, complexity and relentlessness of the cyber risk we face. Those risks are only accelerating with advances in artificial intelligence, automation and the advent of quantum computing. These technologies, as we've heard today, will revolutionise our lives in ways that we are only just beginning to understand, and we must adapt alongside them if we are to remain a serious technological and economic power. Our lives are now dependent on the digital systems at every level, from water treatment plants and electricity networks to transport, financial markets, healthcare and the wider economy. And I think it's fair to say that we are no longer merely supported by digital infrastructure, we are built upon it. And when those systems fail, the consequences are not abstract, they are immediate, they are human, and they can be devastating. And we've already seen that reality play out in this country. We cast our mind back to May 2017, the WannaCry ransomware attack tore through the National Health Service. Tens of thousands of computers were infected, staff were locked out of patient records, diagnostic systems and telephony. Ambulances were diverted, thousands of appointments and operations were cancelled, including urgent cancer referrals. At the time, the estimated cost to the NHS was 92 million, but the human cost, the stress, the disruption, the loss of confidence cannot be measured in pounds and pence. And the crucial point, and we've heard this from contributions today, the attack was not targeted at the NHS, but the NHS was particularly vulnerable because it was reliant on outdated and unpacked systems and the fragmented digital assets it owned. It was a warning shot that should never be forgotten. More recently, the private sector has faced similar sobering lessons. Capita very recently was fined 14 million following a cyber attack that compromised the data of more than 6 million people. British Airways and Marriott International suffered major breaches affecting hundreds of thousands of customers, resulting in substantial penalties and lasting reputational damage. These were not small firms. They were sophisticated organisations with scale, expertise and resources, and yet they were still exposed. That is why this bill matters and why I want to work constructively with the government to ensure we get it right first time, and crucially that we build the ability to adapt and update this framework as the technology and threats continue to evolve, whilst referring to the point made by my right honourable friend for Hertsmere, not making this burdensome on businesses and organisations. As the UK's first piece of legislation to include cybersecurity in its title, the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill represents an important step forward. It modernises the Network and Information Systems framework, brings new sectors into scope, including data centres, managed service providers and critical suppliers. Strengthening incident reporting requirements enhances enforcement powers and allows government to act decisively, I hope, where national security is at risk. I welcome these objectives, in particular recognising that managed service providers and supply chains are now critical attack vectors, and that is an absolutely correct point. Cyber threats do not respect organisational boundaries, and our regulatory framework must reflect that reality. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill must not be treated as some sort of elixir. Cybersecurity is not solved by regulation alone. While the bill strengthens protections for critical national infrastructure, it leaves significant questions unanswered. Questions we must address if we are serious about national resilience. One of the most pressing concerns raised by industry is the growing complexity of incident reporting. Organisations already face overlapping obligations under data protection law, sector-specific regulation, and soon economy-wide ransomware reporting requirements. As that, multiple voluntary reporting channels and the landscape becomes fragmented and very confusing. And having been a small business owner before, when you are dealing with marketing, advertising, payments for staff, it becomes almost a difficult position to be in when you're having to have these extra layers and complexity with reporting added on. The first hours of a cyber incident are chaotic. Systems are down, decisions are time critical, staff are under immense pressure, and forcing organisations to navigate multiple reporting regimes in that moment risks distracting them from the most important task, which is, as we all know, containing the attack and restoring services. A unified reporting framework with a single point of contact and aligned timelines would reduce burdens on businesses whilst improving the quality of information available to government. This bill should move us closer to that outcome, not further away from it. And I look forward to the next passage of this bill to working with government to ensure that happens. We must also be honest about the limits of sector-based regulation, and the Minister referred to this in his opening remarks. While the bill focuses rightly on critical national infrastructure, many of the most damaging attacks in recent years have occurred outside its scope. Manufacturing, retail and consumer services have been heavily targeted, and the attack on Jaguar Land Rover, as it's been referred to by many honourable and right honourable members today, estimated to have caused up to £2 billion in economic damage across the company and its supply chain, is a stark example. And I want to put this point on record that I'm also deeply concerned about the precedent being set when the British taxpayer is effectively required to act as an insurer of last resort for major companies that have failed to adequately defend themselves. For large firms that are critical to our economy, the expectation that the public will step in cannot become the norm. Responsibility must sit squarely with the boards and executives to invest properly in cybersecurity resilience or face the consequences. And I am glad to see that the government have made the initial steps to having that conversation with industry. At the same time, small and medium-sized enterprises, which make up the vast majority of our economy, are particularly exposed. They often lack the skills, budgets and capacity to implement proportionate cyber defences, yet they sit deep within the critical supply chains. As a single weak link can have cascading consequences far beyond the organisation directly attacked. If cybersecurity is economic security, and I think we all agree that it is, we need a whole-of-economy approach. That means combining regulation with incentives, support and standards that uplift resilience across the UK PLC, not just at the very top. This should include stronger secure-by-design requirement for technology products, embedded through procurement and standards, and practical, accessible support for smaller businesses, potentially including considerations of a national first responder model to help small firms recover quickly from cyber attacks. We must also address the skills challenges head-on. Cyber skills shortages are already undermining resilience and compliance, and regulators themselves, if we are to give them more powers to investigate these things, will need additional technical and enforcement capacity to deliver the expanded responsibilities set out in this bill. That capacity cannot be assumed. It must be planned for, funded and developed far in advance. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to raise the issue of cybercrime law. The Computer Misuse Act dates back to the 1990s, a time when fewer than 1% of the population had access to the internet. Its blanket prohibition on unauthorised access fails to distinguish between malicious attackers and legitimate cybersecurity professionals acting in the public's interest. Now that matters, Vulnerability research and threat intelligence are essential to defending our systems, yet many professionals in that industry operate in a legal grey area where carrying out work that ultimately strengthens our national security. Updating that framework, including introducing protections for reasonable research, would modernise the law without weakening it. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill is an important foundation. It strengthens protections for critical services and sends a clear signal that cybersecurity is a core responsibility of a modern state. But legislation alone will not deliver that resilience. That requires coordination, clarity, capability and sustained investment, and an honest understanding of where this bill must be strengthened as it moves through Parliament. Cyber threats do not stand still, and neither can we. And I support the direction of travel set out in this bill, and I urge the Government to engage constructively as it progresses, so that we can deliver a framework that provides real, lasting protections for our country and our economy and the British citizens. Thank you.
Anneliese Dodds.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and a very happy new year to you, to all the parliamentary staff and indeed to all members in this chamber. It's a real pleasure to rise to speak in favour of this crucial bill, which I'm really pleased to see now having its second reading. And of course a pleasure also to follow on from the member for Exmouth and Exeter East. He of course set out many of the stakes that are so critical here, and we also saw that of course in the opening speech from my right honourable friend for Edinburgh South. He described a number of really disturbing cases, as have other members during this debate, and he set out some of the scale of the impact of cyber attacks with some really concerning figures. And just as with my friend for Warwick and Leamington, in particular I was struck by the 0.5% hit to GDP coming from cyber attacks, and the fact that our country has been the third most severely impacted worldwide by cyber attacks. It's therefore very welcome that this bill focuses on a faster, more joined-up approach to deter and deal with cyber attacks. I believe it's gone alongside a really strong grip from the new government on the need for a sectoral approach to dealing with cyber attacks. Of course, unfortunately, we had to see that given the attack on JLR, and I was pleased to see the previous Secretary of State, I know the current Secretary of State has continued this, really engaging with the automotive sector on these issues, on the challenges and lessons that need to come out of that attack on JLR, and that's particularly been important in my constituency given the significance of BMW Cowley for employment in Oxford East. Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe it's critical that we assess cyber security alongside other forms of cyber criminality, as indeed I note the head of MI5 has argued for us to do. Cyber attacks are increasingly being carried out by quasi-non-state actors that operate in the kind of grey zone that the Right Honourable Member for Hertsmere, who's just left the chamber, talked about, often implicitly backed by Russia or by other adversaries. They're taking place at the same time as a rise in cryptocurrency, laundering and disinformation operations. And I have to say that, sadly, I'm forced to share the assessment of GlobSec, the security-focused think tank, that the pattern of Russia's hybrid war has persisted without an effective Western response. There's been an escalation in cyber attacks and also in sabotage, disinformation and political interference, but we haven't seen the kind of joined-up approach across like-minded democracies that is needed here. I was assured recently by my right honourable friend for Torfaen that the government is working with the EU on combating foreign interference. That work clearly needs to be intensified, especially when we see what's happening to other democracies not so very far away from where we are now. I saw the threat for myself directly in Moldova, where cyber criminal methods are often being used in combination. A cyber attack on the election regulator coincided with a disinformation campaign sponsored by Russia and disruptions like bomb hoaxes in real life. So while I welcome this legislation, it must be coordinated with broader work to protect our country's resilience and digital sovereignty and to secure transparency on foreign interference. In that regard, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to end by mentioning a concerning development the sanctioning of 2 British citizens by the United States over the Christmas period. Both have worked to deliver transparency, including on foreign interference, clearly relevant to this bill. Imran Ahmed is from the Centre for Countering Digital Hate. Its dispassionate, evidence-based analysis has uncovered the spread of disinformation, violent racism and material that poses harms to children. Claire Melford is from the Global Disinformation Index. It provides information about the extent of polarisation and disinformation so companies can make informed choices about where to advertise, a free market approach to providing transparency. My right honourable friend for Edinburgh South stated at the beginning of this debate that when national security is on the line, we must be ready to act, and I strongly agree. A number of members in this chamber during this debate have said how important it is that we have a cross-economy and cross-society approach to these issues. I believe the sanctioning of these individuals risks chilling transparency, including potentially transparency that can uncover foreign interference. So lastly, I hope the government will resist all attempts to reduce transparency. The welcome efforts in this bill on cyber resilience must be accompanied with work to counter other cyber and information-related threats to our national digital sovereignty and, more broadly, threats to our national security and interests. Thank you.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by putting on record my broad support for the principles within this bill. This is one of the biggest threats that our country faces, and we're living in the grey zone right now. Every day there are thousands of cyber attacks that take place on private companies, publicly owned companies, infrastructure. This is probably the most profound wave of attacks, hostility that we face that are in plain sight that the vast majority of the country and our constituents are unaware of. And that's for good reason. That's because there are many good people out there working in the National Cybersecurity Centre, in the intelligence agencies, in the military, across government, across private industry, do so much to keep us safe. But that does not mitigate the fact that the threat is real, present, and it's only ever increasing. And it's only ever increasing not just because of criminality in a cyber form, but because of the threats that come from nefarious states, particularly Russia, China, Iran, and others that have been mentioned. JLR is particularly prominent in everyone's minds. The Jaguar Land Rover attack, whilst it affected the whole country and affected global supply chains, it had a particularly profound effect in my constituency, where many of the Jaguar Land Rover workforce are based. And we've seen what happens if we fail to invest sufficiently in our cyber defences. Such a deficiency in investment only seeks to enable those who seek to do us harm. And the point has been made that our lives are not just they're not just sort of somewhat digital, they are fundamentally digital in almost every facet of life for all of us. Madam Deputy Speaker, there's a couple of points in particular that I'd like to emphasise. One that I haven't heard spoken about very much, which I think is within the scope of this and somewhat adjacent to at the same time, which is around the role of foreign technology in our supply chains, particularly kill switches. We're seeing increasing numbers of news articles about these, particularly relating to energy installations. Questions have been raised on numerous occasions on the floor of this House around the prevalence of kill switches in Chinese technology in particular, and the risk of exposure to an adversarial state abroad that could destabilise our energy systems. And I particularly would like to see a joined-up approach from government, across the whole of government, in tackling the broader threat, not just viewing this through one single lens. And I know that ministers will be looking at it across the board, but I would appreciate if the minister, when he's winding up, could address how cross-government this is being looked at. Another particular case is the rise of Chinese-made cars. It struck me around 12 months ago. I rarely saw a JQ car or an Amodo car on our streets. Now they seem to be everywhere, and I cannot help but suspect that given the links that these manufacturers have to the Chinese Communist Party, that there are potentially kill switches within those vehicles, but more importantly, that these vehicles are sending back data to a foreign adversarial state around users' mobility habits, and the implications of that are particularly profound. The final point that I'd like to make very briefly is around the reporting regime. I introduced a 10-minute rule bill to this House a couple of months ago that touched upon the broad principles within this and calling upon government to have a pragmatic approach with regard to the reporting obligations on particularly small companies. I suggested a threshold of £25 million of turnover before a company would be within the scope of my proposed bill. The reason I chose that threshold is that it would have omitted the vast majority of small or family-owned businesses unless they were designated within one of the 13 critical industries. And the reason for that was simply a fear that reporting obligations on small businesses are ever growing, and for many businesses, additional obligations with regard to cybersecurity could result in significant additional headcount that they may not be able to afford. So I'd actively encourage the Minister to engage as much as possible with representatives of small business to ensure that the reporting obligations are as minimal as possible whilst capturing the broad principles of the bill. But to put on record, Madam Deputy Speaker, I support the broad principle of this. I think it's a step in the right direction. I hope that government will adopt a cross-government approach. This is a wider societal issue that all of us have an obligation and a duty to fulfil, and I look forward to seeing its progress and contributing as the bill makes its way through Parliament.
Sarah Russell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and Happy New Year to you, your team and everyone else in the House. It is no overstatement, I don't think, to say that this is one of the most pressing issues of our time, and I suspect that if we weren't bringing forward this legislation, it would only become apparent quite how pressing it had been when there was a major incident that lay it bare. And I think it's one of the marks of successful government that hopefully we are managing, and I touch wood as I say this, but to stay ahead of the curve on these incidents. National security relating to critical infrastructure, there is nothing more important. And I think it's exactly what our constituents want to see us doing. And I wish they saw more of us doing this, discussing it on a cross-party basis with broad agreement. So it's welcome to see the government taking the steps that they are. And I particularly want to discuss the enhanced incident reporting duties on the digital service providers in the bill and the duties to inform customers. In short, I have real concerns about how these will play out in practice, because my experience of having advised whistleblowers in the financial sector is that when there are obligations of this nature, that unfortunately some corporations take more efforts to avoid complying with them than they do to actually comply with them. Now, it's an excellent piece of legislation. I am not suggesting that government should have drafted it in any other way than it has currently been drafted. But I think we need to look at our whistleblowing laws alongside it, because at the moment we don't have strong enough protections for whistleblowers within UK law in an employment and outside of an employment sector setting, so in relation to contractors and other third-party bodies. And if we don't make sure that people have the mechanisms by which they can anonymously report breaches of these sorts of obligations and the right protections for them when their employers, when they are raising the concerns internally in the first place, then we will not be able to make adequate use of the excellent provisions that this bill contains. So I just want to impress upon the Minister how very, very important I think it is that this legislation is looked at in that wider context. Also within that wider context, there is a sort of a broader debate that lots of us have sort of touched on here without really specifically identifying it, about how we balance the risk across society and the costs of those risks, about risk to individuals, risk to national security, risk to individual businesses, risk to individuals within those businesses, so whether that's directors or other senior leaders, and about how we ensure that what doesn't happen within our country is that large tech companies, major data centres and other big private sector businesses take the economic benefits, and that we need those businesses. They're absolutely crucial to us, but that they take the economic benefits of operating in our advanced economy, whilst the government and therefore the taxpayer carries all of the risk and the burden of the regulation. And it's great to see that this bill contains provisions allowing for financial recovery in terms of that enforcement action that we want to take. And it's also fantastic that the enforcement provisions and the finances associated with that, we're looking at up to 4% of global turnover in terms of potential fines for not complying. So in terms of, my position as a former lawyer is always that I want to know that things are enforceable. And I think there are good enforcement mechanisms here, and there's plenty of money, that could potentially be at risk, that incentivises the kind of compliance that we would want to see. But as I said, I think we need to look at that kind of broader societal piece about how we balance the risks and opportunities in relation to tech in general. Now, I was going to talk quite a bit about my concerns about my local public services and how they can better manage cyber security. And the legal aid agency cyber attack managed to enable criminals to steal the details of anyone who'd applied for legal aid between 2007 and 2025. I mean, the scale of the financial risks to those individuals can't be overstated. The amount of personal data that involved was absolutely huge. 6 out of 10 secondary schools are now subject to cyber attacks. We have the Cheshire Cyber Security Programme, which is in place to help local small businesses to manage their cyber risk and provides training for up to 5 members of staff and small businesses. So our local police powers are being used to try and take proactive steps to improve the situation for our local small businesses. Schools in academy trusts are spending really quite a lot of money on cyber insurance to try and protect these risks, and we've seen schools across the country shut down by their inability to open following cyber attacks. So the public sector action plan that the government's published this morning is incredibly welcome in terms of cyber risk, and I really look forward to the opportunity to go through it in more detail. But we, again, need to look at where the balance is of cost within our society. I would like to add to those who have suggested that we should be reviewing the Computer Misuse Act 1990 in terms of how the lack of current protections for researchers doing important work in this area. We obviously have several institutions that are currently engaged in cybersecurity work, the Alan Turing Institute and the Cyber Security Centre. We need to make sure that those have the right remit, and because actually this is an area that is only going to expand with the complexities of AI adding in here, and ensure that we are making sure that everyone is protected to do their job effectively in protecting individuals, businesses and our wider society. So, lastly, I would just like us to say that we need to move as quickly as we can on this, and it's great that we are maintaining our EU alignment, because realistically, the only way that we can continue to be a major player and to have considerable influence over companies, many of which have now got much larger budgets than major economies, is if we work in conjunction with other countries. And I think that that's what our ongoing relationship with the EU should really be about. So thank you to everyone who's been involved in the work on this bill. I think it is absolutely excellent and it's completely the right direction of travel. I think it is a shame that this doesn't get more publicity. The fact that the government is doing the right thing every day, even when it frankly is not likely to grab very many headlines. It's about doing the work, getting the right structures in place, and moving forward productively, cross-party where humanly possible, securing our nation and ensuring that our economy is on a strong footing, and there's everything to be said in favour of that. Thank you.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Cyber attacks are a growing menace for British businesses. Cyber attacks cause chaos for all types of businesses and organisations, both small and large. And the consequences of those attacks have hit our economy hard. The disruption caused by the cyber attacks on Jaguar Land Rover, M&S and the Co-op were felt by many businesses further down their supply chains. For instance, the disruption that hit JLR resulted in a freeze for their steel supply chain, much of it in Wales. So much of our economy relies on well-functioning digital platforms and functions. Last year, many Lloyds Bank customers found themselves unable to access money or pay their bills due to app outages. That was a problem that was compounded by their decision to close high street branches. Yet, bizarrely, Lloyds still decided to pay its CEO, Charlie Nunn, £5 million in 2024. I make this point just to illustrate the lack of accountability that we're seeing at the positions at the top of these organisations, despite the massive numbers of people who are reliant on those services. A successful cyber attack often ends, of course, in people having their personal data stolen. And that's why it's welcome that this bill highlights sensible requirements to ensure businesses properly consider supply chain risks and their usage of managed service providers, as well as many others. On the other hand, it will be a mystery to many why more sectors have not been included, such as finance, food and drink and retail, particularly considering as those sectors have been hit hard recently. The government would clearly like to achieve security, and to do that, it would help if the bill could be improved to provide greater certainty and clarity for businesses. For instance, how are businesses supposed to manage relationships with managed service providers? For 5 years, I worked in the cybersecurity industry, starting with the introduction of the GDPR, which of course happened at the same time as the original NIS directive. And I found that the cybersecurity sector is a well-connected community, one underpinned by a very welcome commitment to sharing knowledge and best practice. For instance, Cyber Wales is a representative body that brings together the Welsh cyber community. It's an industry that requires input from academia, law enforcement agencies, defence and businesses. There are clusters of success across Wales, including in my constituency. Partnerships built in academia often create spin-off companies that generate jobs. For instance, in Wales, the University of South Wales and Swansea University have done a lot to build up our local cyber security ecosystem. And as this bill progresses, the government would be wise to continue to consult regularly with this very engaged community. And it would be helpful to hear what sort of consultations have taken place so far and how many. It would also be helpful to hear the government respond to ISARCA's proposals, particularly regarding giving regulators the power to suggest mandatory penetration testing. The growing cybersecurity sector should be a route for much-needed economic growth and well-paid jobs in Wales. Many of these jobs can be done remotely from anywhere with an internet connection. Recent research from InfoSecurity suggests that there are 17,000 vacancies in the cybersecurity industry right now, a figure growing at a rate of 10 to 12% a year. That's a huge opportunity for a country like Wales. Having an effective skills base is one way that we can guard ourselves against cyber attacks. Keeping Britain safe from cyber attacks requires a trained workforce who can marry technical expertise with regulatory competence. I've seen in my professional experience how many people from many other sectors were able to retrain and upskill to work in cybersecurity. People with experience in project management or managing processes are very capable of retraining to work in the cybersecurity industry. Special thought should be paid to military veterans in particular, who are very well suited to those jobs. And one of the questions for government here should be how to help more British people into these jobs, whilst also ensuring that our education system is equipped to help children pick this sector. And that's why I'm calling on the government to ensure funding is available for all schools in Wales to take part in the highly successful Cyber First Wales scheme.
Mike Reader.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to start with a story, and this is a real story, but I've changed the names for obvious reasons. So it was a Tuesday afternoon. I had a call from our CEO, David, and David said to me, Mike, I'm jumping on a plane, but I need to speak to a law firm we've been working with. This lady called Sandra is going to ring you from A&A law firm. I want you to speak to her. She's going to talk to you about a project that we've been working on. Sorry I've not been able to read you in until now. And so Sandra then rings me on WhatsApp. I think this is a bit strange, you know. David's a very busy man, but why would he ring me jumping on a plane? Sandra rings me, it seems pretty legit. We have a chat, turns out we may know someone in common. I look her up on LinkedIn, her firm is legit, she's there, she's got similar connections to mine. She tells me, I need to sign the NDA so we can talk to you about this opportunity that we're working on with David. And I said, fine. So I signed the NDA, and they sent me a Teams link, and I joined a call, and on the call was Sandra and some of her colleagues, and also on the call was David, my chief exec. Now, his signal wasn't very good, and he said, Mike, I'm on a plane, but I've tried to join just to say, you know, thanks so much for being a part of this. We're looking at an acquisition in your business area. I want you to work with A&A legal partners to make sure that they've got the information they need. This is a real opportunity for us to grow. You know, we've been looking to grow the business. And then his signal went, he dropped off, and I carried on the conversation with Sandra and her partners. And then they started asking questions about information that maybe they didn't need, operational matters about how the business worked. And then they followed up another call, started asking about financial information about some of our clients. And then they followed up another call, and they were asking about financial information about the business. And about that point, I thought, I better ring David and just make sure this is legit. And when I rang David, he had no idea this was going on. Our business was being attacked through a deep fake intrusion where they'd mirrored our chief exec, used his voice for a call, used his image for a Teams call, and had I, the story's actually a friend of mine, had I not called my boss to say, is this legit, they could have got away with goodness knows what. And that seemed quite far-fetched, but at the same time, another big British firm, Arup, got done by a very, very similar deepfake scam, and they lost £25 million to scammers. So the reason I started that story, and it is a real legitimate story that happened to one of my colleagues, is because this bill is really important, and it is a framework bill that will set out how we put in force better standards, procedures, controls, but actually the key thing where many businesses fall down, whether they're data centre providers, MSPs, or many of those already covered by legislation, is the human in the loop. And we've heard already the very first intervention from my colleague, the honourable member from Harlow, about how to get culture right and how to get people considered in the future legislation, the future guidance that will come on the back of this bill. And I just wanted to open up and make that point on the record, that we can do all we can in terms of the technical processes, the procedures that come out the back of this bill, but actually what is really important is we focus on the human in the loop, the human aspect, because quite often that is where these major attacks start. So I'm really pleased to support the bill. Cybersecurity and cybercrime impacts our daily lives. I won't repeat the stats that we've heard from many of my colleagues in the House on both sides. Impacts on the businesses that support our economy, it impacts on our public services, our banking sector, all those things that we use every day. And it's right that after a considerable amount of delay, after the 2022 work from the previous government, this now comes forward, and I'm very pleased it seems to have cross-party support. The bill recognises that attacks come from a wider range of methods, including data centres, outsourced IT providers, and complex supply chains working in the sector. And I think that's really, really critical. For my constituents in Northampton, we're on the data superhighway coming out of London, moving north. We've seen over £1 billion announced in terms of investments of new data centres, both in the public sector and private, in the last 6 months. And I thank the Minister and his department for all their hard work in securing that investment that will create new jobs in my constituency. But without improved regulation and clarity, which is what this bill delivers, that investment still remains slightly uncertain, and this bill definitely improves clarity and certainty for the sector, as well as, of course, with all the many businesses that already work in my constituency that may either rely on a managed service provider for their IT or those who provide data centres, and particularly important for all the MPs in the House, because the control centre that looks after your security is in my constituency. So you'd want to think that the data security is particularly important for our personal well-being as well. I looked at this as well from a perspective of the businesses in my constituency on how many of them use managed service providers for their IT, and actually large businesses do. In my previous business, we had an MSP that provided our help desk, that provided many of the services. When I had a problem, I'd ring out. We're talking a business of 7,000-8,000 people. So expanding it there to include managed service providers, I think, is absolutely critical to give us better protection, improving standards and resilience, and therefore reducing burdens on the businesses that use them, particularly their cyber insurance costs. The two asks I make from government at that point, though, is we do it proportionately. I think some other members have made that point. The impact on small businesses of change in this area may be considerable in terms of both their costs from those MSPs, but also the direct cost to them, and also that we do really work hard to make sure we consider how this legislation works with international law, where particularly a lot of those MSPs, help desk, etc., use overseas workforces, as I personally experience. I really welcome the stronger reporting requirements. I think actually I recognise the point made by one member who talked about his bill he brought forward on regulation and reporting, but from a business perspective, as long as there is clarity And I think this bill sets out that there will be better clarity for business. We get honesty and trust, and we get a business environment that people understand what they have to do, when they have to do it, and this bill moves that forward. I also really welcome that in the bill there's much stronger enforcement powers, and I think it sends a real message to criminals that there are significant risks to them, but also to businesses. I would say money talks, and when there are stronger enforcement risks to your business, all of a sudden cybersecurity will end up higher up your corporate risk register than perhaps it was before. So I think as this bill is implemented, I'd ask that we do see genuine consultation with industry. What's particularly important here now is that this is a framework. Well, yes, of course I have to give way.
What is the honourable gentleman? And he's making a very interesting and pertinent speech, I think, to the bill. One of the issues that I hope he would welcome in the bill that is strengthened is the requirement for companies not only to look at prevention, but to have an adequate recovery plan in place. And I wonder whether he thinks that in the bill there's enough kind of adequate sanction contained for those companies which are deemed not to have an adequate recovery bill, because I think my reading at the moment is that regulators can't necessarily fine for a negligent recovery. But as he said, the human factor so often matters, but that matters as much in recovery as it does in prevention, surely.
I think the bill goes some way, and I think it's very clear that the future legislation, the guidance that comes around this will start to frame that. There are other ways, of course, that we can drive businesses to improve their business resilience planning, and it's part of the standard procurement process of government to require business continuity planning to be demonstrated to government, and many large businesses in all our constituencies will be trying to transact with government, with its local government, national government, the NHS, etc. So there's other ways within the way that government, the state impacts with business, that business resilience is also required, and I think procurement particularly that's my background, is one of those key areas. So I was just saying to the Minister, as I kind of sum up, I guess, the one concern I have is that this is a framework bill. There's lots of future guidance and things that will come, and we need to see continued consultation. And I think that message has already been made by others as well, that the standards are really clear. One of the reasons this is coming forward is because the legislation was getting quite messy, and we want to make it a lot clearer, and we're really clear with business of how we engage, and also that we give early notice to organisations so they can adjust, that this isn't sprung on business as we push to address what is a real threat and has been recognised right across industry. And of course, I'll come back to my original point that we consider the human in the loop when we set guidance, when we set requirements, that we are looking at how businesses think about the human aspect as well as just the technocratic solutions that would be in a business continuity plan or similar. So this is a very necessary bill. I think I support its aims and focus, and I think it signals real confidence to the market, those already operating in it and those now who are coming to invest in great places like Northampton to build the future data centres and other infrastructure we need. Thank you.
Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I refer the House to my register of interests. Before I start, I'd just like to commend my right honourable and honourable friends, the members for Hertsmere and Exmouth and Exeter East, for their excellent speeches, and particularly to associate myself with their comments on the Computer Misuse Act of 1990 and the need for an extension to our cyber skills in this country. Before entering this place, I worked professionally in cybersecurity and operational resilience, advising businesses of all sizes on how to reduce the risk of cyber attacks and helping them understand how far-reaching the consequences of a cyber breach can be from a commercial perspective, not just a technical one. As Vice Chair of the Business and Trade Select Committee, we've had direct evidence for our report on economic security from Marks & Spencer, Co-op and Jaguar Land Rover, all of whom suffered catastrophic breaches last year. And whilst the attacks were different in form and impact, as my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, has said, they shared a common feature. They were driven by social engineering, not technical failure. Human access was exploited, trust was abused, and controls failed further up the chain. The outcomes, however, were very different. At Co-op, a more modern, secure by design IT infrastructure enabled an early containment strategy, limiting the impact on customers, stores, and the bottom line. Marks & Spencer, which hadn't prioritised early replacement of legacy infrastructure, suffered months of major disruption to customer-facing services and retail logistics. The financial impact alone for M&S is in the region of £300 million, or 45% of their prior year pre-tax profits. Jaguar Land Rover was in a different category altogether. There, the attack cut into operational technology systems, tightly integrated with manufacturing operations, bringing production lines to a standstill and disrupting just-in-time supply chains. That shutdown cascaded far beyond a single company, directly impacting numerous suppliers in the Midlands regional economy, as many members have already mentioned, as well as contributing to a measurable fall in UK GDP, estimated to be in the region of £2 billion. These cases demonstrate that cyber risk manifests in three ways: operational risk, financial risk, and reputational risk. Too often, even at FTSE level, businesses and boards fail to grasp that this is a potentially devastating combination. I hear the same message repeatedly from industry, including at the Financial Times Cyber Resilience Summit in London, where I spoke at the end of last year. There is frustration from CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, and security vendors that it can be difficult to develop conversations with boards and audit chairs to assign the appropriate resources and strategic prioritisation. Businesses accept that standards must rise, but what they want is regulation that is targeted, proportionate, and focused on prevention rather than paperwork. This bill does some things well: updating the 2018 NIS framework, expanding coverage where it is genuinely needed, and strengthening enforcement powers are all sensible in principle. Faster incident reporting has value, but reporting alone is not resilience. There are gaps that matter. First, the bill does not go far enough on governance. Cyber failures are governance failures. Responsibility sits not only at board level, but clearly and specifically with chairs and audit and risk committees. Yet the bill stops short of driving meaningful accountability there. Without that pressure, cyber will continue to be delegated downward to IT and operations teams rather than owned at the top. Second, there is a risk of confusing activity with preparedness. Increasing reporting obligations after an incident does nothing to stop the incident occurring. Prevention is always better than cure, and this legislation needs a stronger emphasis on baseline capability, risk maturity, and early intervention. Thirdly, we must be careful about cost, capacity, and particularly enforcement. The implications for SMEs are significant, particularly those pulled into scope through supply chains. At the same time, regulators cannot enforce what they are not resourced to oversee. Without credible enforcement, this bill risks becoming a paper exercise, and boards will respond accordingly. Fourthly, the bill needs to recognise both the connection and to draw a clear distinction between IT and operational technology. What works for enterprise IT systems may be inappropriate or even dangerous in OT environments, such as manufacturing, critical national infrastructure, energy, or logistics. Segregation, architecture, and configuration of security devices must be assessed. Risk profiles differ, controls differ, and that nuance matters. But I want to be clear, we on this side of the House support the aims of this bill in principle. Cyber resilience requires a whole-of-society approach involving government, regulators, businesses and boards working together. But if this legislation is to drive real change, it must be enforceable, proportionate and grounded in how organisations actually operate. Board and audit committees must feel the weight of responsibility. Regulators must have the tools and resources to act, and prevention must be prioritised over post-incident form filling. The National Cybersecurity Centre has produced clear, practical guidance for boards, and that should sit at the heart of our approach. We need smarter regulation, properly enforced, not just more of it.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I want to start by saying Happy New Year to you and to the staff and to all in this House and to the residents of Portsmouth. I want to thank the Minister for his introduction to the bill and highlighting some of the major concerns of cyber insecurity has caused this country and continues to cause. Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Cyber Security and Resilience Network and Information Systems Bill because it reflects a clear change of direction under a Labour government moving from a fragmented and often reactive approach to a cyber security, one that is strategic, cross-government, resilient and focused on national capability and everyday solutions. We've heard it said many times in this House that the first duty of any government is to protect its citizens, and in the modern world that duty must extend to the digital systems we all rely on. Cyber attacks now pose a daily threat, not just to government systems, but to the livelihoods and security of people in Portsmouth, where major employers, manufacturers, ports and supply chains are attacked, and the consequences are immediate and personal. Production can stop overnight, wages can be put at risk, and sensitive personal data can be exposed. Constituents in my city who work for supply or depend on companies such as Jaguar Land Rover have seen this reality firsthand. Madam Deputy Speaker, when large engineering, retail and manufacturing firms are targeted, the impact ripples far beyond their head offices, reaching workers on the shop floor, contractors, small local suppliers and customers whose orders are delayed or indeed cancelled. For a city like Portsmouth built on defence, maritime work, engineering skills and complex supply chains, cyber resilience is not an abstract policy or a technical exercise. It is about protecting jobs, safeguarding family incomes, maintaining confidence in the system that keep our city working and ensuring the security of the public services people depend on every day and ensuring really that our city's residents are kept safe. Madam Deputy Speaker, like other members in the House today, Portsmouth City Council has been a target. In late 2024, the City Council's website was hit by a cyber attack called DDoS, a distributed denial of service attack by a pro-Russian hacking group. The attack made it very difficult for residents to access council services online, and for a period of time, Unfortunately, no personal or council services were compromised, but the attack did demonstrate that even local public infrastructure in places like Portsmouth is a real target for cyber actors and not just an abstract risk. Local crime statistics show cybercrime is also a lived experience for Portsmouth residents. Around 60% of our residents reported experienced crime in a 12-month period, including phishing attempts, online fraud and accounts being hacked. And as my mother friend from Harlow noted, not all of these crimes are reported as people are embarrassed, feel alone, feel foolish. And that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is how these crimes continue to proliferate through our society. Local police crime figures also show significant levels of harassment, malicious communications and other online offences are often instigated through cyber attacks. These are not just techie problems, they translate into financial losses, practical inconveniences and most alarmingly psychological harms, and in some cases people attempting to take their own lives because of the damage that's been caused. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, yes, there is an economic cost to cybercrime, but there is also a human cost. And that is why this bill matters. It modernises the UK cybersecurity framework by strengthening baseline requirements, improving instant reporting and extending protections to a wider range of essential services and supply chains. And its three pillars are welcome. It recognises that weaknesses in one organisation can rapidly cascade across the entire economy, whether through cyber criminals or hostile foreign actors. It recognises that cybercrime is real and its effects are devastating. And this is not just about big business. Cyber attacks, as we heard today, disrupt NHS appointments, threaten energy and water supplies, and prevent people living their daily lives. Last year alone, 11,000 NHS appointments were lost due to cyber attacks. And since 2024, at least 5 direct cyber attacks have been targeted on UK water supplies, Southern Water being one. And in 2025, it's reported that 62% of our UK energy organisations experienced cyber attacks. Crucially, Labour recognises that cybersecurity is not only a technical issue, but a workforce and an economic one. Clearer standards and stronger oversight give businesses the confidence to invest, raise resilience across the economy, and ensure organisations are not left to face increasingly sophisticated threats alone. The bill also rightly ensures breaches are reported swiftly within 24 hours, because pace and speed are vital if we are to minimise the domino effect of cybercrime. The bill also rightly gives regulators the flexibility and powers they need to act as new threats emerge. This is with the assurance of resources and transparency adds to a more consistent strategy and evidence wider clarity. This is particularly important for Portsmouth. Our city is home to the Royal Navy, with one of Europe's most significant naval bases, alongside a major commercial port, advanced engineering and manufacturing activity, and a university that recognises expertise in cybercrime and digital security. Madam Deputy Speaker, we as a city, when we were blitzed in the Second World War, we could see it and we could act on it. Cybercrime needs to be brought to the light in the same way, so that we can all act on the attacks that are happening, so that we can create a different culture where people don't hide behind and aren't embarrassed to tell what has happened to them, their businesses or their community. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that Portsmouth already plays a vital role in our national security and industrial base. It's not just a target, but a part of the solution. I'm proud that the University of Portsmouth is recognised as a centre of cyber expertise, with leading research and collaboration on cybercrime, digital security and economic crime. Its centre, Madam Deputy Speaker, for cybercrime and economic crime brings together multidisciplinary experts studying cybercrime courses, prevention and resilience, and works with community groups, schools and local businesses to raise awareness and protect people from cybercrime. The university also conducts advanced research into cybersecurity systems and threat detection through computing and behavioural science, helping develop real-world solutions that improve organisation and national resilience. These efforts not only support local households' employees, but also grow the skilled cyber workforce that the UK needs, linking directly to the economic and security objectives of this bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill lays the foundations for a more secure and more resilient Britain, and I am pleased to support its second reading. And in doing so, I seek reassurances and clarity from the Minister on 4 key points. Firstly, how the whole of government will work together to ensure that Portsmouth, with its defence, maritime and manufacture base, alongside thousands of small businesses, local services and the public sector, are supported to benefit fully from this bill. 2, how government will work with and reach all employers to strengthen knowledge and skills to strengthen both cybersecurity and long-term economic resilience and accountability and their responsibility. And 3, how will the bill be linked to investment in cyber skills and training, so we are not left without the people needed to make the changing world an easier place to live? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, how can we ensure that this is just the start of the conversation? And how can we use this bill to help change the culture around cyber attacks so individuals and organisations can, yes, take responsibility and ownership, but in an environment that is supportive rather than laying the blame for incidents? And how across the House, as we as MPs, can we encourage openness amongst our constituents, small businesses and larger employers and the public sector alike, so that together we can carry out the government's first duty, which is to protect its citizens in a modern, ever-changing world.
Lake.
It's a pleasure to speak in the second reading of this bill, and I'm very pleased to say that I support the government's introduction of the Cyber Security and Resilience Bill, and welcome it for it is a very important first step in strengthening the protections of the UK's critical national infrastructure, and for it because it also addresses many of the
gaps that have been identified in numerous implementation reviews in recent years. And as other honourable members and right honourable members have already made the point this afternoon, Madam Deputy Speaker, the risk and the harm inflicted by cyber attacks are significant and very real. Others have already cited the impact that it has on a whole host of businesses and industrial sectors, and as also society. We've heard of the impact and the harm that is inflicted on NHS services, for example, and also many members have referenced the attacks on JLR, the Co-op, and indeed on Marks and Spencer's. The impact that they had not only on those businesses but also the wider supply chains and local economies are significant, and I think the Minister indeed referenced in opening the debate that it is estimated that some £14.7 billion worth is lost to the UK economy annually due to cyber attacks, and that's equivalent of 0.5% of GDP. And so it is right that the government acts to try to address these risks and these harms, and in doing so they comply with one of the clauses of the Strategic Defence Review, of course, which stated that the world has changed, and in listing the other sort of more conventional threats that the country faces also specifies that daily cyber attacks at home is something that we need to take very seriously. And so I think the government is right to bring forward this bill, and as other members have made very clear, the nature of cyber crime, cyber attacks and the threat that they pose are ever evolving. And so I do have a great deal of sympathy with the government that they are endeavouring to try to keep up with what is a very quickly and rapidly developing industry and nature of threat. And although I support the bill and look forward to working with ministers as the legislation passes through the House, I would like to raise just 2 points on which I'd welcome clarity or indeed further consideration of the ministers. A few members have mentioned the importance of looking at our cyber resilience in a more holistic manner, and that whilst technical security and safety is very important, and I think the bill goes a long way to address those matters, it could perhaps be strengthened in the terms of looking at our digital sovereignty, if you like. Other members have made the very important point that we do need to consider supplier concentration in this field and the domestic capability, because if we fail to do so, we do risk long-term dependency. Now, there are a few examples that I could draw upon. Perhaps the one that I will is that of when Microsoft decided to suspend the use of some of its services to justices in the International Criminal Court. Now, I'm not saying that Microsoft are going to threaten the UK government or any of our services, but it does illustrate the risk that if we are over-dependent, or if aspects of our economy or businesses are overly dependent on certain suppliers, then we are vulnerable. And then I think it is right that the government has a way of looking to try to prepare contingency plans for that, or at the very least consider the potential impact of over-dependence on certain suppliers. And in that regard, I wonder whether actually Part 3 of the bill, in which the legislation stipulates that a statement of strategic priorities will be made by ministers, whether this is a consideration that could be included as part of that statement. We could then bring about a way in which a statement not only looks at the technical security as part of a cyber resilience approach, but also this digital sovereignty and domestic capability. And I do think in that regard, it's not too dissimilar to some of the efforts we're starting to see from European partners. I think France and Germany are starting to look to undertake similar strategies and reviews of their own domestic capability and potential over-reliance on certain suppliers. The second and final point I'd raise, and perhaps this is more for clarity, looking for clarity from the ministers, perhaps when they're summing up, relates to Part 4 of the bill and the directions to certain bodies and persons for national security purposes. I do feel as though if we accept that the nature of the cyber threat and the risk to cybersecurity are ever evolving, it will be impossible for any one legislation to hope to encompass all possible dangers that we may face. And so in order to try and future-proof the bill, especially in terms of national emergencies or crises, I wonder whether ministers should consider even further powers in terms of the last resort powers, particularly to perhaps direct or enable them to direct the shutdown of any domestic data centres or AI systems in the event of a security or operational emergency. I ask this because I'm not entirely clear whether the powers listed in the bill already allow them to do that or not, but if not, I'd ask whether they'd be willing to consider such powers, just so that the government is able, in the future, in the event of such a national crisis or emergency, to intervene appropriately if those emergencies are caused by AI systems out of particular data centres that could have or could cause large-scale harm to the public, especially under those very rare and hopefully unlikely scenario in which the designated people and persons that are otherwise responsible for those systems refuse to cooperate with the government. But in raising those 2 points, Madam Deputy Speaker, I also want to underline my support for the government's efforts in this regard and very much welcome the bill and its second reading today.
Wellington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and Happy New Year to you. I welcome the bill and the Cyber Action Plan for Public Services that's been published today. We know and we've heard from the many great speeches that we've heard from honourable and right honourable members today in this House about how important this is to the UK economy and to the UK public. Despite being one of the smaller economies in the world, we are still one of the most cyber-attacked countries in the world. In the last 12 months, we've seen some good news, with only 4 in 10 businesses and 3 in 10 charities having cybersecurity breaches, which is down from the previous year. Yet, we are seeing a huge increase in those that are nationally significant cyber incidents, which are more than double than last year. And this includes the malicious cyber attacks of critical infrastructure by Russia and China. This is really important to those companies based in Milton Keynes Central, where 1 in 3 jobs are in technology. Milton Keynes is a leader in the development of AI and tech services, including legal services, financial services, and of course, autonomous vehicles. But all of this good, and they are companies that have experienced cyber attacks. So this is a very, very welcome bill. The difficulty we have is that it's missing a huge portion in the discussion, and it was also somewhat neglected in the Minister's comments and the strategy set out. And I'm hoping that it will be addressed in the comments at the end, summing up today's debate. It is the role of sovereign technology in order to fight cybercrime. And what does sovereignty actually mean? Because it's quite clear that there are many definitions about what sovereign technology actually means. What it means to myself and to most of the public and the industry is that it is UK innovation and UK technology. It's been developed in the UK and it's UK-owned intellectual property. It is a company paying UK taxes, and most importantly, it is a UK company accountable to the UK. Now, the government's talked a lot about its commitment to developing and securing sovereign AI, but this needs to be extended to all critical technology and infrastructure. This is not just something that is important in terms of cybersecurity. It also has its other advantages. It's good for the economy. It creates innovation. It sets the highest standards and thereby gets public support and confidence, and achieves small business support in terms of absorbing innovation. It achieves growth not only by creating UK customers, but ambitiously creating worldwide customers. And the government has, in the past, done this quite well. It has created safe and secure solutions. The Crown hosting data centres is a really good example of a joint venture between government and ARC data centres. But unfortunately, it's only providing 3 to 4% of government servers actually use Crown hosting. And you've got to ask why. So I asked the Minister, what are we doing to promote these UK safe and secure that would help us fight cybersecurity, ensure that it's promoted across the public sector, but these solutions also gain support within the private sector. Instead of using these Crown hosting data centres, many are using ones run by foreign firms with securities and standards developed outside of the UK. Outages at AWS and cloud hosting has cost business millions. And if we also look at other areas where the public rightly worries about cybersecurity attacks, NHS data, we've heard about the impact of cyber crimes against the NHS and the impact that's had on lives, but it also impacts public confidence. Palantir has had a 330 million contract for all NHS data, bringing it together, which is a fantastic initiative and really important, and the public support that because they don't want to repeat their health story to each and every doctor or nurse or other health professional that they meet. The difficulty is using a foreign firm with some questionable alliances has led to the public trust being eroded. It's also led to the public trust, to the trust being eroded by doctors, slowing the take-up of this important innovation in NHS services. This is partly because the co-founder of Palantir called our pride in the NHS Stockholm Syndrome. Now, unfortunately, he misunderstands the very service in which he is trying to sell our services and thereby eroding public trust. Now, I know many UK firms that could have done just as good of a job and probably better because the public trust, the doctor's trust, would have increased. Now, we hear that Palantir has just had a £240 million contract with the MOD for data analytics capability, supporting critical strategic, tactical and live operational decision-making across classification. That is a direct quote. Again, hugely important that we are using the latest technology in this to promote our MOD. Hugely important that we are tying all of that up. I don't think anybody in this House has concerns that the MOD is making these kinds of investments. It is the partners that we choose to partner with that drives the concern. And the reality is cybersecurity, as I've already argued, has to be UK focused. We have to protect our national interest, and we have to ensure that our partners have our national interest, our cybersecurity, first and foremost. And the reality is organisations like Palantir, their views on the NHS, but also their integration into the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, otherwise known as ICE, leads us to worry that they do not share UK values. It creates a strategic vulnerability. That is what the sector is saying to us, and we should listen to them, because cybersecurity isn't just about reporting, it's about the investments we are making ahead of time. So imagine if those two contracts were given to UK firms and the economic opportunities for those UK firms, including enhancing the UK-based cybersecurity, having confidence in our most critical areas of health and the military. I'd like to raise another area where I'm sure, if the Telegraph reporting today is correct, will have significant concerns in public trust. They are reporting today that the government is considering using Starlink for the emergency services network, replacing the existing radio setup. This is the system used by ambulance, police and fire in an emergency, our most critical infrastructure. A company that's controlled by a man who's shown his willingness to turn off satellites at his own political whim. In Ukraine, yes?
She's making a really, really important point about Elon Musk's Starlink system. Yeah. But will she go a little bit further and recognise that not only has Elon Musk switched off Starlink in Ukraine, his own will, but he's done so on occasions that may have turned the tide of the war?
I thank the honourable member for raising that point. He did turn it off at very strategic points for the Ukraine military when they were advancing on Russian-held territory. And I think that's important to put on note. It wasn't just that he chose to turn it off. He chose to turn it off at a critical time for the Ukrainian military. So I worry that somebody who chooses to do that, somebody who encourages the UK public to violence at a far-right rally, where he said, whether you choose violence or not, violence is coming to you, you either fight back or you die, is not appropriate or a safe partner for our emergency services. I also want to say I absolutely support the comments from the member, the Right Honourable Member from Oxford East on transparency and some of the actions being taken by those who have been willing to stand up to these companies and demand transparency. And I think, while probably not the subject of today's debate, I do think is a really, really important action that we must take as a warning for future action that can come. So I welcome this bill, and I welcome the action plan. But to truly make the UK safe and secure from state-sponsored or criminal cyber attacks, we need to ensure that it is a UK sovereign infrastructure, a UK sovereign capacity and capability. And the government can lead the way in this in its own procurement practices by making sure that we are partnering with UK sovereign firms. This is good for security, good to protect us against cyber attacks, and it's also good for the economy and good for public trust. Thank you.
Andrew Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and what a privilege to follow my honourable friend, the member for Milton Keynes Central, who made a fantastic speech just then, and I don't think mine will follow quite with the same quality, but I'll do my best. Having spent my career as a software developer prior to entering this place, it's perhaps not so much a pleasure, but maybe a blast of nostalgia to be speaking on this bill today. This bill provides for an important and long overdue update to the NIS regulations and provides the means to keep them up to date more quickly as new threats emerge. This was a massive gap in our capability left behind through the rather haphazard and cavalier manner of our departure from the EU, and it's absolutely right that we resolve this as soon as we can. It's a cliche, isn't it, to say that the nature of threats that we face has changed, whether it's state-sponsored cyber attacks, hacktivism, identity theft, or ransomware attacks. These threats can have a widespread and significant impact on people's lives, on the wider economy, and on our safety and security. And as many members from across the House have noted today, the cyber attack on Jaguar Land Rover that led to them posting a loss of £485 million last year, and I think we heard earlier a £2 billion impact on the wider economy, or the co-op infiltration, which cost them at least £206 million. But this is not a new issue, and there's virtually no area of the economy that has not experienced attempts to penetrate its systems and cause disruption or to steal data.
Can you give way on that point?
I'd be happy to.
I thank him very much for giving way, Madam Deputy Speaker, and he speaks of the cyber attacks on Jaguar Land Rover and the co-op. The council taxpayers at Gloucester City Council have concerns that following a Russian cyber attack in 2021, the council recently discovered a £17.5 million deficit, and I wonder if he'll recognise that too.
I thank him for his intervention. I confess I'm not an expert on the IT of Gloucestershire City Council, but I'm sure the front bench has heard and they may wish to respond in their summing up. Turning to the measures in this bill, I welcome the measure to bring managed service providers and data centre infrastructure into scope. And when I began my career working on hotel reservation systems, legacy on-premise infrastructure was the standard operating practice. Some organisations would develop their own line of business systems, some would buy in, but virtually all would be hosted on their own servers with often clever names like Spartacus or Xena or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, as I worked with over the years, for a whole pile of reasons, such as the need to support more public access, the requirement to facilitate more home working, huge increases in the speed of domestic and business broadband, the need to provide failover, redundancy and scaling, shifting away from big capital investment and towards more infrastructure as a service, and wanting to benefit from more rapid rollout of features and applications that require significant server infrastructure behind them, like we've seen more recently with AI. Systems have been moving virtually wholesale to those that are managed remotely and sandboxed for multiple organisations, and towards virtual servers or services and data centres rather than on-premise tin. So bringing these two areas into scope is obvious and it's long, long overdue. On this part of the bill, I'd like to offer a note of caution, and that is around the threshold at which the regulations apply. For MSPs, managed service providers, we need to ensure that we're providing appropriate levels of cybersecurity without blocking new entrants to the market, and that applies to critical suppliers too, because the risk there is that we end up boosting the hegemony of the big outsourcers and IT suppliers rather than being able to support new entrants, domestic new entrants. The risk of vendor lock-in that we've heard several times today. And equally on data centres, the threshold appears to me at least to have been set so high that only larger data centres will be in scope. And I really hope that the Minister will keep both of these points under review as the bill progresses and think about how we can strengthen this and strike the right balance. The other area of the bill that I wanted to talk about was about the regulators. Now, the Minister set out in his opening remarks why he believes a sectoral approach is appropriate, and there is merit to this argument. Sectoral regulators have deep, long-standing institutional knowledge, and they understand how the processes work in their sector. However, as I touched on earlier, the consequences of failure are enormous, with real-world impacts to people's everyday lives, and we shouldn't expect whilst we shouldn't expect an overarching cyber regulator to have the domain-specific knowledge of the water sector or the air traffic control sector, but nor should we expect every sectoral regulator to carry the expertise of how modern scalable data centres that detect faults automatically and will automatically fail over to different regions or different jurisdictions work. And I think we just need to think about what the priority of an individual sectoral regulator will be, and it won't necessarily be cybersecurity. So we have to get this balance right, and I think we do need to listen to the sectoral expertise on this. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is an important and long overdue update to the UK cybersecurity framework. I look forward to working with the government to get the scope and scale of these regulations right, and to ensure that all the systems that we rely on every day are secure in the face of current and emerging threats. Thank you.
Minister Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So the Cyber Bill should be one of the most fundamentally important pieces of legislation the House will consider in this Parliament, because the UK's cyber resilience is a cornerstone of the foremost duty of government, the protection of the people. My honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, has already made clear that His Majesty's official opposition appreciates the urgent need to act to protect our society, our economy, and our security in the face of growing and evolving cybersecurity risks. But the Cyber Bill is the bill of missed opportunities. It would not have stopped the JLR or Marks and Spencer cyber attacks. It is silent on the threats from hostile state actors, and it does not answer the fundamental question: if NIS 1 was not enforced, what difference will further regulations make? Cybersecurity is key to our national security. It's too important an issue to play partisan politics. As a responsible opposition, we will work with the government to get the approach to this legislation correct. Now, many honourable members have made very insightful contributions to today's debate. The Right Honourable Member for Hertsmere, who has great experience and raised the issue about hostile state actors and gave some practical advice to the ministers, which I hope they reflect on. The member for Exmouth and Exeter East, who also talked about his professional experience and the need for proportionate regulations and modifying the Computer Misuse Act, which was raised by several other members. The member for Bromsgrove, who importantly pointed out the issue regarding physical technology and the risk of threats from cellular modules. The member for Bognor and Littlehampton, who spoke also about her experience, particularly the importance of government to make sure we actually have impact from this bill. And I'd like to also mention the member for Ceredigion Preselli, who mentioned digital sovereignty, an important issue that I know we've discussed many times in this place, amongst many other colleagues across the House who took part in this debate. The member for Warwick and Leamington, the chair of the Select Committee for Newcastle and Tyne Central and West, a member for South East Cornwall, for Oxford East, Congleton, Northampton South, Portsmouth North, Milton Keynes Central and Mid Cheshire. Madam Deputy Speaker, the gravest and the most pernicious risks to UK cybersecurity go completely unaddressed by this bill. Cyber is the emerging battlefield of state security, with hostile state actors ramping up their efforts to disrupt our society, our economy and our democracy at pace. Time and time again, in this Parliament, the government has balked at acknowledging the elephant, or in this case, the dragon, in the room of matters of national security. Last year, the director of GCHQ, the UK's intelligence and also cybersecurity agency, confirmed that it devotes more resource to China than any other single mission. The evidence is clear. The Chinese Communist Party is one of the greatest national security threats our country faces. In November last year, Mr. Speaker took the exceptional step of circulating a briefing from MI5 warning of the widespread efforts of individuals and organisations working on behalf of the Chinese Ministry of State Security to target Parliament for intelligence gathering. In the intervening weeks, we have learned that the Home Office systems were accessed apparently by a Chinese state affiliate group. Reports have circulated that the attack is linked to the Chinese gang Storm 1849, previously connected with cyber attacks on MPs and the Electoral Commission. Further, in December 2025, the government confirmed that it sanctioned 2 Chinese companies for perpetrating what it described as indiscriminate cyber attacks on the UK public and private sector IT systems. These are not isolated incidents. They are evidence of a concerted and intensifying campaign on the part of the Chinese Communist Party and its affiliates to undermine vital public services and UK businesses. How our country and how our democratic allies and partners face the threat of hostile state actors working in concert is an epoch-defining challenge. It's a challenge we must meet or we will live to regret it. It's no coincidence that several recent cyber incidents have targeted organs of government, with malicious actors rightly perceiving that many of our government departments are the weakest links in the cybersecurity ecosystem. The National Audit Office's 2025 report on government cyber resilience laid bare the inconsistent and in some cases glacial progress of government in making effective improvements in cyber resilience. Last month's attack on the Home Office IT systems is a stark reminder of the urgency of improving government cyber security. His Majesty's official opposition has received a clear message from cyber industry stakeholders that the government should be leading from the front and setting the standard for effective cyber resilience. Now, while I'm pleased that the government has managed at the last moment to push out the cyber action plan today, and it acknowledges the challenge, but how it will ensure change is delivered is unclear. Now, finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, Attacks on household named retailers such as Jaguar Land Rover, Marks & Spencer and Co-op have raised public awareness of the risks we are facing, with consumer supply chains interrupted and jobs put in peril. But this bill would not have prevented those attacks had it been enforced at the time they took place. Given the constraints on public finances as a result of the Chancellor's reckless budget decisions, the government needs to ask itself, how many cyber attacks of the magnitude of JLR can we afford to bankroll? The government must undertake an urgent review to identify companies whose failure as a result of a cyber attack would present a risk to the UK economy of a comparable scale to JLR. Madam Deputy Speaker, failing to address all these urgent problems would leave an open goal for malicious cyber actors to undermine the UK's security and prosperity. This House is unlikely to revisit cyber security legislation for some time. The threat to our economy and national security from malicious cyber actors is amongst the most serious we face as a country. In the parliamentary debate following MI5's China espionage briefing, the Minister for Security pledged to strengthen the legislative tools available to disrupt this threat. So why not use this opportunity now, presented by this bill, to address it head-on? We stand ready to work with the government to stand up for and protect our country and prevent this bill becoming yet another missed opportunity.
Minister, Kinishkin Orion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to first and foremost thank all members right across the House for their contributions throughout this session. I'm glad to see that the House has welcomed this bill with deep expertise represented right across the House by members and right honourable members. They have, of course, raised questions which I will seek to share the government approach on. But before that, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me set out what is at stake. The UK is the most cyber-attacked country in Europe. In 2024, over 600,000 businesses were subject to a cyber attack. The average cost of a cyber attack is just over £190,000. The cost to UK businesses in aggregate of cyber attacks was estimated at £14.7 billion every year. The personal experiences shared by my honourable friend from Northampton South in particular is on my mind, as well as the particular facts shared by the honourable friend from Warwick and Leamington, talking about the most common password in this country being password, and indeed my honourable friend from Mid-Cheshire talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a very effective name being deployed in some of these contexts as well. The combination of those aggregate impacts as well as those personal experiences, Madam Deputy Speaker, are the motivation for this bill. National security is the first responsibility of any government. As cyber threats grow and the failure of the opposition and government to have moved fast enough in light of that growth, this government is acting robustly to make sure the British public is secure. The big message is this: let's ditch legacy systems and platforms and move to a more secure future. We've done it by ditching the Conservative Party. It's time we do it right across our economy. Let me turn, Madam Deputy Speaker, to some of the themes raised by members and right honourable members, in particular the question of looking to the future, and in particular the threats from AI emerging in the future, raised by both the shadow benchers, the right honourable member from Hertsmere, as well as my honourable friend from Congleton. AI will almost certainly continue to make elements of cyber intrusion operations more effective and efficient, making cyber threats more frequent, more intense. That is why fundamentally it is important that organisations take steps to bolster their cyber defences, and that is why under these regulations organisations must have regard to the state of the art when maintaining the security of their network and information systems. This applies not only to cyber defences but also to cyber threats. And I'm conscious in particular that in response to the point raised by the right honourable member for Hertsmere, agentic AI will be a particular risk for cyber. I think a very significant source of mitigation in that context has to be the quality of our capability, both in the private sector but particularly the public sector. In that context, I pay tribute to the work of the AI Security Institute right at the frontier in understanding the risks of agentic AI as well. A number of members right across the House raised questions of scope. Let me start by clarifying it. There is, of course, a significant sense of risk right across different parts of our economy. We have chosen to focus, as the NIS regulations historically have, on essential services, the failure of whose network and information systems pose imminent threat of life to the British public. And it is for that reason that the scope of the bill is as tight as it is. That is not to say that all other businesses shouldn't be doing a great deal to protect themselves against cyber attacks. The government needs assurances that essential services whose disruption would have the most profound consequences for public safety, national security and economic stability are the ones that are prioritised in their resilience to cyber attack. Businesses outside the scope of this bill should make it, of course, a critical business priority to gain the same level of assurance without the need for as much government intervention. I'm very aware of the particular points made by my honourable friends from Lichfield for Warwick, Leamington, the chair of the Joint Committee on National Security Strategy, as well as my honourable friend, the chair for the Science, Innovation and Technology Committee around Jaguar Land Rover. In that instance, the government acted swiftly in very exceptional circumstances, providing a £1.5 billion loan guarantee to protect jobs, support businesses in the supply chain and preserve this vital part of British industry. However, as the honourable member for Exmouth and Exeter East noted, this should not be the expectation on government. Businesses must look to their own defences as a matter of corporate responsibility. I might just make a bit of progress for now. I'm also conscious that my honourable friend from Warwick and Leamington raised the particular issue of the food sector and food retailers in light of recent attacks. Well, following the particular recent attacks on Marks & Spencer and Harrods, I know that my honourable friend, the Minister of State for Food Security and Rural Affairs, has written and engaged deeply with the CEOs of major food retailers to advise on how the food sector can best protect itself from cyber threats as well. There's a broader question as to sectors that are not regulated in this bill that has been raised by numerous members across the House. A sector not being regulated under this bill does not mean that relevant organisations cannot protect themselves against cyber attacks. This bill is not designed, as I said, to cover every sector. Where the sectors are covered by existing regulations or where government does not consider it essential to regulate the sector through these regulations, we have taken a proportionate approach. Introducing blanket coverage for whole new sectors would create extensive regulatory burdens for more of our economy, stifling economic growth. At the same time, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill will enable the government to bring more sectors into scope in the future and take swift action if national security is at risk. That is also sitting alongside a series of actions that the government has taken, and can I highlight in particular the act of the government having written to UK businesses and trade bodies right across sectors to make sure that they are, one, embedding cyber essentials across their supply chains, two, making cyber resilience a board-level priority, and three, that the NSC's pre-early warning system and advice is heeded in those organisational contexts as well. I'm conscious, Madam Deputy Speaker, that both the shadow benches and the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, as well as my honourable friend from Congleton, raised the particular question of the public sector's coverage. The public sector requires a significant step change in cyber and digital resilience. Today, we have published the Government Cyber Action Plan, as has been mentioned numerous times, backed by £210 million of investment. The plan takes decisive action and holds government departments accountable for their cybersecurity and resilience, as well as providing them with more direct support and services, as well as coordinating responses to fast-moving incidents. I will take up the shared cause that my honourable member for the New Forest East raised around the juiciness of local government digital provision, a phrase on which I share very much his enthusiasm. The Government Cyber Action Plan does take into account wider government and public sector coverage. In fact, it strengthens, clarifies and joins up how lead government departments hold wider public sector, including local government, to account for improved and equivalent cyber resilience. I'd also make a particular observation on the points made on scope around not just reporting and assessment, but recovery and resilience as well. And can I flag to honourable members right across the House that the proposals that we have in place for security as well as resilience requirements are being prepared for secondary legislation, and they will align with the NCSC's cyber assessment framework, relating very much to effective response and recovery, with consultation likely in the year ahead. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are a series of questions and comments raised about regulators and both proportionate as well as effective regulation in this particular context. This bill will allow regulators, foremost, to make sure that they are resourced in order to carry out the duties of the bill. This will be through charging reasonable fees to cover more of the costs of their activities under the regime, and to enhance their impact through clearer information gateways, increased incident reporting, and establishing a unified set of objectives. I'm conscious that the Shadow Secretary of State talked about both regulators not finding enough and equally that they might find too much. I will let her work out the obvious contradiction in her position, but in response to the Right Honourable Member from Hertsmere in particular, I think there is very clear scope for AI capability to be used in triage, and I would very much hope that the reviews embedded in the requirements of the bill that the Secretary of State must undertake will ensure that we're also looking at efficient ways in which regulators can do so. In response to the point made by my honourable friend, the Chair of the Science, Innovation and Technology Committee, around the frequency and quality of the reviews for the regime in this bill, DCIT will monitor and evaluate the new framework to review the effectiveness of the regime. The bill requires the Secretary of State to lay a report on the operation of certain NIS legislation before Parliament and to publish at least every 5 years. It will be an extensive review, and as a result of that, we want to make sure that it's proportionate rather than overly frequent. The particular commitments made by the Secretary of State to the Chair relate primarily to those in the legislation. In response to the points made by my honourable friends from Warwick and Leamington, as well as Mid Cheshire, about the possibility of a cross-sectoral cyber regulation approach, can I flag that 12 regulators are responsible for enforcing this regime because different sectors rely on different technologies with very different risk attitudes and vulnerabilities and responses. And in that context, it is right that we utilise sector expertise to address those sector-specific issues. I'm conscious that the Honourable Member for Bognor Regis and Littlehampton made an appropriate point about enterprise IT and OT being differentiated, and indeed it is why we have taken a sectoral lens as a very tractable way of differentiating some of these particular risk vectors. And so for that reason, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have set out both a sectoral approach, but that is not to preclude the possibility of the Secretary of State setting out in a statement of strategic priorities to set out the possibility of coordination and information sharing across regulators as well. In response to the particular points made by the Liberal Democrat spokesperson as well as the Honourable Member for Exmouth and Exeter East around making sure that incident thresholds are clear and proportionate, the 24-hour light touch notification requirement is a proportionate requirement. It only needs information to alert the regulator and National Cybersecurity Centre of the nature of the incident, and it doesn't rely on overregulation, in particular with the exception of data centres. Reportable incidents that affect operators of essential services would need to have affected the operation of significant network and information systems right across the entity and to have significant national security impact. That is extremely unlikely to include minor thresholds such as the receipt of a phishing email. I'm conscious that my honourable friend, the Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, had raised a point around financial services organisations in particular, and I wanted to respond to that simply to flag that UK financial services are resilient against cyber threats. The threats are, of course, growing, but the regulatory context of the Financial Conduct Authority, the Prudential Regulation Authority, and the Bank of England are indeed some of the sources in terms of the approach that we have taken to this particular bill as well. And just to continue on this theme of regulatory overlap that has been brought up, this government will, of course, make sure that some businesses which have to navigate multiple regulatory frameworks with multiple services are facing the minimal burdens, and we will make sure that we work with our regulators and international authorities, including those in the EU, on the implementation of the bill as well. Madam Deputy Speaker, if I turn now to the impact on business to make sure that it is both security as well as proportionality that the legislation takes in this context, this government will only regulate when it's necessary to protect our economy and our country from serious harm. A single attack can disrupt hospitals, transport, vital services, putting lives at risk. We will not gamble with our economy or our people's safety. The cost of doing nothing is, of course, too great. As I mentioned, cyber attacks drain almost $15 billion a year from UK businesses. At the same time, this bill's approach makes sure that there is a proportionate approach to ensuring the safety of British people. The question of board-level responsibility has been brought up by a number of members across the House, and I would say simply on that front that all business leaders need to take responsibility for their organisation's cyber resilience. On the 13th of October last year, the government had written to CEOs requesting that they make cybersecurity a board-level responsibility. The government's new cyber governance code of practice focuses on governance of cyber risk specifically, and we are, of course, going to consider the use of secondary legislation to require companies to clarify their cybersecurity responsibilities at the board level as well. I'm conscious a number of members had raised the point about the effect on small and medium-sized businesses as well. Growth is the government's #1 mission. Small businesses are the engine room for that growth. They provide many of our most important services. That is exactly why small, and in particular micro-sized, managed or digital services are exempt from regulation under this bill. They can only be regulated if they are designated as critical suppliers, for which there will be an extremely high bar for designation, which should allow the point raised by my honourable friend from Mid-Cheshire around particular companies which meet that bar for designation as well. A point was raised around the ability for small businesses to tell whether they're in scope quickly or not. The regulator will complete an investigation process, including notices and consultations with relevant businesses, prior to confirming whether an organisation meets the criteria for being in scope. That process needs to be robust, but of course we would hope to make sure that those regulatory processes are proportionate too. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to turn now to a really critical question raised by my honourable friend from Milton Keynes Central, the Right Honourable Member for Oxford East, as well as the Honourable Member for Ceredigion-Preseli, around long-term sovereignty and capability in this country. Madam Deputy Speaker, I felt over the last decade and a half the party opposite in government sold this country's strategic leverage away when it came to the primary sector, software and digital infrastructure. We will not repeat that mistake. We have already committed right across the board to extremely robust digital sovereignty measures as well. We have committed 500 million to a sovereign AI fund. We have made sure that there are tens of billions of pounds pouring into this country to make sure this country has the capital infrastructure for AI in particular, with British firms like Nscale right at the heart of it. There is an advanced market commitment for cloud compute to make sure that British companies are right at the heart of provision of core infrastructure in the future. Through the British Business Bank, we are committing tens of billions. I'm very happy to give away.
Talk about sovereign capability, but how can we have fully sovereign capability when we don't own the means of production for the most advanced chips?
Minister.
Well, I would point the honourable member to both a very thriving compound semiconductor cluster in South Wales, as well as a series of chip design, as well as chip manufacturing companies. If he doubts the advancement of ARM as the primary chip design company in the world, I would point him to go and read a primer on the chip company supply chain again as well. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a very clear sense of digital sovereignty that this government is pursuing, and I want to flag in particular in the context of China that we are taking strong action to protect our national security, including our critical national infrastructure, as well as making sure that where appropriate we are looking at opportunities for cooperation. The national security strategy, the independent review of state threat legislation and our new powers on counter-terrorism will make sure to do that. I'm conscious I'm testing your patience, Madam Deputy Speaker, and so I will flag simply the final point, which is the whole society approach a number of members and right honourable members made. We are making a series of investments in skills, in making sure young people are inspired to pursue careers in cybersecurity, and to the points made by my honourable friends from South East Cornwall and Portsmouth North, I am deeply passionate about making sure that young people and young women and girls in particular in those areas in Wales and right across the country pursue thriving careers in cybersecurity. Madam Deputy Speaker, national security is the first responsibility of this government. This bill could not be more necessary in confronting the developments and global cyber threats. I would like to thank all members and honourable members for their engagement on the bill as it progresses. I encourage them to engage deeply in doing so. To all rogue organisations with hackers at the helm, and I don't just mean the Conservative Party, I say this: your time is now up. With this bill, we will make sure the British public is secure.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Programme motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Money motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Ways and Means motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes